Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by P.E. Moskowitz. It's The Case Against Free Speech, the First Amendment, Fascism, and the Future of Dissent. This is from the introduction. This book is not anti-free speech. It is anti the concept of free speech. It's an important distinction. Everyone should have the right to say what they want. I will not argue otherwise. I am not an authoritarian. In this book, I will not argue that the United States should adopt laws banning racist speech, like the ones that have proliferated throughout Europe, for example. I think those laws are often counterproductive and end up being used against leftists instead of against racists. I won't argue that Nazi speech should be outlawed as it is in Germany. I won't argue that the First Amendment should be reformed nor more firmly upheld. This book is not about whether the First Amendment is good or bad. This book is about why the First Amendment is nearly irrelevant, except in its power as a propaganda tool. In the following chapters, I will argue that free speech as a concept is meaningless, that it is a dialectical smokescreen more than an ideal to be upheld, that in a grossly unequal society, in which a few corporations control the means of media dissemination and a small group of the ultra-wealthy bankroll entire political movements, there can be no meaningful definition of free speech. On paper, I'm free to speak as a billionaire. I am as free to speak as a billionaire. Yet I do not have the power to change laws through political donations, to influence college curricula, or to quash entire movements for economic liberation. And still, I hold more speech power than most. I am a published author, and my speech is sanctified by the gatekeepers of my publishing house. Therefore, the path to free speech, I will argue, has less to do with a law about speech, or many laws, than with ending racism and inequality. Throughout U.S. history, disparate groups have claimed to cherish free speech more than their enemies. Unionists in the 1920s saw free speech as synonymous with striking and ultimately class revolution. Today, conservatives are the group to most often shroud their politics in free speech, arguing that any silencing or protesting of their speech runs counter to U.S. values of freedom and liberty for all. But as I hope to prove in this book, free speech has never really existed, because freedom and liberty have never really existed for the vast majority of Americans. Instead, the U.S. has systematically acted against those values, suppressing the opportunities, speech, movements, and actions of the masses, especially people of color and anti-capitalists, in order to favor the free flow of capital to the owning class. This oppression and suppression have been constant since the founding of this country, and therefore free speech is a hollow signifier, pointing to a past that never existed. The funny thing about free speech is that it's been used to fight for and against these liberties, both as a guise for the wealthy and powerful to oppress the poor, like the Koch brothers and their supporters using free speech to push through anti-democratic legislation and rip apart campaign finance laws, and as a rhetorical tool for the working class to further their cause, as happened in the early 1900s when leftists argued that free speech includes the freedom to riot, and the ACLU argued it was the only way to prevent a violent revolution. I don't argue that one definition of free speech is more legitimate than the other, but that they are all relatively empty signifiers, hiding more tangible structures of power and ideas underneath them. So why write a book on free speech if I think the term is essentially meaningless? Because the concept holds so much weight in our country. We argue endlessly about whether it's being trampled on, whether college students hate it, whether the government is adequately upholding it, but we rarely ask what free speech is, or how we got to the free speech crisis we supposedly face today. When you scratch the surface of conversations over free speech, you find more difficult issues underneath. It's much easier to talk about the ability of conservatives to speak on college campuses than about the systemic racism, sexism, and transphobia college students experience. And those are the things that students who protest campus visits by right-wing conservatives are actually fighting against. It's easier to fantasize about a country that values free speech than to grapple with the fact that we place so much emphasis on free speech while jailing dissidents and allowing tens of millions to live in poverty. What is free speech to someone who works 60 hours a week and has no time nor any platform to use their supposed right? There is relatively little literature and philosophy on free speech, despite the fact that it has been in constant contention since the founding of this country. Even the legal history of the First Amendment is sparse for something so foundational to the values of our country. A few have seriously grappled with ideas of what free speech does and does not mean, most notably literary theorist Stanley Fish, who has argued that the term does not mean much at all. Leftists like Noam Chomsky have written about free speech tangentially in their explorations of media as a propaganda tool. Most history books on speech are written as hagiographies, unquestioning the intent of the Founding Fathers and their morals, with a few notable exceptions, such as Laura Weintraub's The Taming of Free Speech. I don't intend to fill the yawning gap of research history and philosophy. This is not a definitive account of free speech, but a necessary intervention, prodding us to be more critical of the term, and maybe along with it, of the other lofty concepts we must hold near and dear. The Case Against Free Speech. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday. Boy, are the winds crazy here in Portland. And we're only, I mean, our winds are like 20 miles an hour. And it's like, chunks of the city have lost power and things. But down in California, they're getting 80-mile-an-hour winds. If they haven't hit already, they're scheduled to over the next day or so. This is not good after a 5-6 year drought. We've got fires going all over the place, in part because of just an obscene decision by the U.S. Supreme Court back in 1976, and going, what the hell does that have to do? What does the Supreme Court have to do with wildfires in California? I'll get to that in a minute. I want to start out though with. And in fact, we've got an op-ed up about that. But I want to start off with the Republican Party is pretty freaked out right now. And, I toss this out as a question to you. Does it seem to you from the people that you know, the friends that you're talking to, the trends that you're seeing on social media, what you're hearing around the water cooler, what you're hearing at family and friend gatherings, that this might be the case? The headline that, over at Raw Story was 3-alarm fire, Republicans shaken and now fear losing both the Senate and the White House in, of course, November 2020. And this is all based on a report over at Axios, saying that Republicans have been shaken by poor fundraising results. They're also worrying they may lose the White House. Gee, you think? I mean, Trump has never had his favorability ratings, to the best of my knowledge, never had them above 50%. And his net negatives are just startling. Democrats only need to pick up 3 seats to win back control of the Senate if there's a Democrat in the Oval Office. Not sure why but in any case, there it is. Democrats are raising more money. Democrats are polling better. And this Axios notes in battleground state after battleground state. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, keep in mind, this all started with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in 1971 when Lewis Powell wrote a memo to his buddy Eugene Sindor, who was the head guy over at the Chamber, and a friend of his and a neighbor of his. And that memo said, we've got to take over the schools, we've got to take over the churches, we've got to take over the courts, we've got to take over the universities, we've got to rewrite the textbooks. We've got to create institutions of propaganda, essentially, think tanks, and out of this whole thing. Oh, and we've got to start buying the media, et cetera, et cetera. And out of this came the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute and the Right now, you got the Federalist Society, which is feeding judges, young right-wing judges to the courts like there's no tomorrow. Out of this came the acquisition of, well over 2,000 radio stations by right-wing sources, television, over 200 radio stations now, television stations by Sinclair, the creation of Fox News by Rupert Murdoch, a billionaire who lost hundreds of millions of dollars in the first 5 years, but hey, it's worth having. They built this entire infrastructure while the Democrats were sitting around going, the unions will keep us going. And what's so incredible is that then the next year, Nixon puts Powell on the Supreme Court, and then in 1976, Powell says, or the Supreme Court says in the decision called Buckley versus Vallejo, a 5-4 decision, for the first time in the history of the United States, says, if a billionaire wants to own a politician, we used to call that bribery, right? It used to be illegal. I mean, there's laws going back to the 1800s making that illegal. But we, the Supreme Court, are going to say it's not illegal. That's free speech. It's protected by the First Amendment. If a billionaire wants to spend money owning a politician or buying some political outcome, that's fine with us. And that, of course, that decision in 76, and then the one 2 years later in 78, the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision, which said, and by the way, this is true of corporations, too. If they want to own their own private politicians, that's free speech also. That opened the spigot to an avalanche, a flood, a river of money flowing into the 1980 campaign, sweeping Ronald Reagan and Republicans into office, and, the rest is history, essentially, which is how we get to today. Here we have now Alexander Vindman. Alexander Vindman was 3 years old when he came to the United States. His parents brought him and his brother here from Ukraine. It's the all-American immigrant story. He went to school. He learned English. He became an American citizen. He went off to Iraq, where he fought and was wounded. He has been in the U.S. military since 1998. I mean, this guy has just an absolutely incredible CV. And he was in the White House, and on the call when Donald Trump tried to shake down and solicit a bribe or offer a bribe. I suppose you could say it went both ways. And of course, the impeachment clause of the Constitution says a president shall be impeached for treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanors. When Trump solicited a bribe from the president of Ukraine, you give me this, I'll give you that. Quid pro quo is the Latin for this for that, and this for that is the English for bribery. So anyhow, this guy, who is an Army lieutenant colonel, as is his brother, by the way, and works in the White House, he's going to have an interesting day going to work tomorrow, is testifying right now before Congress, or was just a short while ago. I'm assuming he still is. He is the National Security Council Director. He works for the National Security Council, Director for European Affairs, which includes, of course, Ukraine. And so he was on this call, and after the call, Sondland, the hotel rich guy from Portland, was saying to the people in the room, we're not going to give that military aid to Ukraine unless Ukraine gives us some dirt on Biden. And Lieutenant Colonel Vindman said, no, you can't. That's wrong. That's not honorable. That's not American. Those are not our values. That's a crime. Soliciting foreign help in a domestic election, that's against the law. And so what does Trump TV do? I mean, this is insane. And it kind of goes back to this question, my original question. Do you think that the Republicans are going to lose in 2020? Or, put another way, do you think the Democrats are going to win in 2020? And if so, to what extent? I mean, what are your bets, right?
I'm thinking that there's an actual probability now that the Democrats take all three branches of government. And if so, and I realize, I'm knocking wood as I'm speaking here, but, if this is the case, then probably the next conversation we should have is, what do we do? What does the dog do when it chases the car? Or when it catches the car, when it gets the car bumper? So anyhow, back to Vindman. So we go to state TV, to Fox News, to Trump TV. And Fox and Friends, Brian Kilmeade, he essentially, this is from this piece written by Mark Sumner over at Daily Kos. He says, Brian Kilmeade again dismissed the Purple Heart recipient's connections to the country he's served for decades. Instead, says Kilmeade, Vindman, quote, tends to feel simpatico with Ukraine. We also know he was born in the Soviet Union. Well, yeah, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union when he was born. And his family fled when he was 3. Donald Trump tweeted it about Vindman. He called him a never-Trumper, which last week he said never-Trumpers are human scum. And I mean, this is just mind-boggling. This is just absolutely mind-boggling. There's a brilliant piece by Philip Bump in today's Washington Post, The Fundamentally Un-American Attacks on Alexander Vindman. You know who has stood up and said that these guys who are attacking Vindman, and there are several of them. You had John Yoo on Laura Ingram's show yesterday on Trump TV. You got Brian Kilmeade this morning on Fox and Friends. Sean Duffy, U.S. Republican congressman on CNN, he says, I understand that. We all have an affinity for our homeland, where we came from. Like me, I'm sure the Vindman has the same affinity, and he's entitled to his opinion. He has an affinity, I think, for the Ukraine. He speaks Ukrainian. He came from the country, and he wants to make sure they're safe and free. In other words, this guy isn't loyal to the United States. If you can't attack the information, you attack the messenger. I mean, that's what they're doing. And now, of all people, Liz Cheney has stepped up and said, these attacks are un-American. You guys need to stop it. Liz Cheney, the woman is fine with torturing people, but, hey, this, I guess, a broken clock is right twice a day. But back to how we got here. How did we even get here to a point where we've got a political party in office that fundamentally does the opposite of what the majority of the American people want? I mean, in a representative democracy, the majority of the people want is what is supposed to be enacted into law. And that was the way it worked here in the United States right up until the 1980s. I mean, we got there's a long list of things that we got prior to the 1980s. Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, the 40-hour work week. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. All of those things, clean air standards, clean water standards, all of that was prior to 1981. All of that was prior to the Supreme Court saying it's fine for billionaires to own politicians. And now you've got PG&E passing $4.5 billion to their shareholders and saying screw you to San Francisco that wants to buy out their infrastructure. Literally, people are dying because PG&E is so corrupt. And yet, even the Democrats in California can't do anything about it because so many of the Democrats are owned by PG&E in California. So where is this all going? How do we fix this? I mean, it seems to me like step one is getting money out of politics.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. By the way, Joe Biden has reversed himself on taking super PAC money. I think that actually might be wise. We'll talk about that, too. We'll be back. And welcome back. Mike in Manhattan, Montana. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
How's it going, Tom?
Great. What's up?
So I listen to a right-wing show here in Montana every morning, and I call in all the time and repeat things you say. But and
good on you.
So today you repeated them. They're saying that the Dems are getting embarrassed and that Republicans just don't want to admit who they're going to vote for, and that's why the polling is where it is. And so, well, basically saying that the Republicans are embarrassed to vote for Trump, but they're going to anyways, you know.
You know, the last time I heard this was in the in the early 2000s when we started seeing a lot of redshift, you know, where the exit polls would show that, well, for example, the exit poll in 2004, the exit polls in Ohio showed that John Kerry won by about 3 points, but the actual vote caused him to lose by 160,000 votes. And so they went to the pollsters and they said, you know, why were your polls off? You know, not thinking it might have had to do with, you know, who knows, you know, people being thrown off the voting rolls and not knowing that their vote didn't count, or electronic machines that were untrustworthy, or the fact that at 11:30 that night, on the night of the election, Ohio had to reboot their election systems and retake all their data off a server in Kentucky that was owned by friends of Karl Rove. You know, who knows? But the answer that they came up with was, well, the Republicans were just embarrassed to admit that they had voted for George W. Bush. And, you know, I've heard this excuse before, Mike. It doesn't hold a lot of water for me.
No, I don't agree with it. And can I plug a product to get off plastic?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
It's called the Green Up Box, and it's a monthly subscription to quit using plastic.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. Thank you very much. Good talking to you, John. Appreciate. Excuse me. I appreciate the call. John in Vancouver. John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I was just wondering, you know, I think that the difference in the deep state between the right and the left, and what we need to convince the right of, is that deep state actually exists in corporate America, not within our government. Our government has oversight, where behind closed doors and in the Seychelles Islands, these CEOs are determining what our benefits are going to be and what our pay is going to be.
That's an interesting point. And for that matter, they're determining what our laws are going to be. I mean, this was the Gillens and Page study in 2014, that our laws are now being written by corporate lobbyists, you know, put into effect by corporate law. You know, basically, it's not we the people. It's not even legislators anymore.
It's the shadow government of the deep state, and that is transnational corporations.
Yeah, the deep state is the corporate state. You know, brought to you courtesy of the Citizens United and Buckley and First National Bank on these Supreme Court decisions. This policy, this doctrine that the Supreme Court invented out of thin air. That's an excellent point, John. Go ahead.
And one other quick point. If Biden isn't going to take big money, maybe we should organize Progressive Palooza and get some musical artists on board to throw big concerts and raise money for our presidential candidate.
Yeah, I think it's the other way around. I think he's going to take big money. He wasn't going to take super PAC money. But, you know, you don't disarm before the war is over, even if your goal is disarmament. And so I'm thinking that whoever is the Democratic nominee, if there are billionaires, you know, Tom Steyer's and George Soros is out there who want to support them, that they should be allowed to. But that's, you know, I realize that that's like, you know, not living your values. And so I'm kind of conflicted about it, but that's what I'm thinking. John, thanks a lot for the call.
All right. Peace out, brother.
Yeah, there you go. Good talking to you. We'll be right back. So let me just wrap this rant up. You know, for example, pharmaceuticals are getting more and more expensive. Why? Because in part because in 2003 there was this law, it was called the Medicare Modernization Act of 2003, that created Medicare Part D. In other words, Medicare would pay for your drugs, but made it illegal for Medicare to negotiate drug prices. So, you know, Medicare may pay for 1 million tablets of penicillin a year, but they have to pay as if they bought them one pill at a time, full retail, which is, you know, a multi-$100 billion windfall for the drug industry. And it's also one of the reasons why drug prices have been exploding. 93% of Democrats think the government should be able to negotiate prices. 74% of Republicans think the government should be able to negotiate prices. You would think, therefore, the government should be, is able to negotiate prices. I mean, that was 2003. That was, 13 years ago? 16 years ago? I don't do math in my head real well, but that was a while ago. We've had plenty of opportunities to fix this. Why hasn't it gotten fixed? Because our government has been taken over, basically, as the last caller said. The deep state is the corporate state, is the transnational corporate state. Our government has been basically taken over by everybody else. And therefore, we no longer have democracy. And this is an absolute crisis. People talk about constitutional crisis. We are having a democratic, small d, democratic crisis in this country. Since the 1980s, since the Supreme Court doctrine that allowed corporations and billionaires to take over our government, and Reagan enthusiastically embraced these folks, and to some extent some of the Democrats have as well. Since that time, government no longer is doing what the people want. I mean, Americans want clean air, pure water, healthy environment, and yet every administration since Reagan, and yes, including 2 Democratic administrations, there have been some forward movements in those administrations, but the arc of things has been backwards. The majority of Americans want affordable college, strong Social Security, a livable minimum wage. But since 1980, everything's been going in the opposite direction. Why? Because the average people's opinions don't matter anymore. Gillens and Page, these 2 professors from Princeton and Northwestern, did this study a couple of years ago. I think it was published in 2014. And they wrote about it in the Washington Post. And here's what they had to say. They said, strong support among the affluent is associated with a 25-point greater probability of a policy being adopted, while strong support among the middle class is actually associated with a small decline in the likelihood that a policy will be adopted. In other words, our legislators, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, are no longer doing what the majority of the people want. In fact, they go on to say, in other words, strong support among high-income Americans roughly doubles the probability that a policy will be adopted, like tax cuts for billionaires. Strong support among the middle class has essentially no effect. End of quote. Well, I mean, that means you don't have a democracy. A democracy is where the will of the majority of the people is enacted into law through a legislative process. In a representative democracy, it's done. You hire essentially people, you vote people in, and then they do it on your behalf. Your elected representatives. In a pure democracy, you vote for it yourself. Now, about half our states have that with ballot initiatives. We don't have that at the federal level, but it just isn't happening anymore, and has not happened since 1981. Americans never said to Reagan, hey, take a big bite out of Social Security, cut back on Medicare and Medicaid. No, but that's what happened. Americans never said to Reagan, hey, kill the rights of working people, flatten the minimum wage, lower wages for working people. No, they never said that, but that's what they got.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And that's what they're continuing to get. So, anyhow, democracy is it dead or is it on life support? And what's this going to mean for the 2020 election?
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unwanted Spy by Jeffrey Sterling, The Persecution of an American Whistleblower. This is from the prologue. Where am I? How did I get here? Those are the kinds of thoughts you have when your ultimate nightmare comes true. It was January 26th, 2015, my second long day of waiting in a small, windowless, soundless conference room just outside the courtroom number 5 on the 4th floor of the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Over the past 2 weeks, I had been on trial, accused of violating the century-old Espionage Act. As an undercover officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, I'd been involved in Operation Merlin, a covert scheme to derail the Iranian effort to build a nuclear bomb by providing their scientists with fake, flawed blueprints for warheads channeled through a Russian scientist. Operation Merlin had ultimately backfired when the Iranian experts detected the fraud, as revealed in the book State of War by reporter James Risen. Agency leaders were furious, not at themselves for launching a risky and ill-conceived scheme, but at the author who dared to expose their incompetence. In their eagerness to punish someone for their embarrassment, they looked around for a scapegoat. They found me. A compliant U.S. attorney dutifully filed an indictment charging me with, quote, unlawful retention and unauthorized disclosure of national defense information, mail fraud, unauthorized conveyance of government property, and obstruction of justice, end quote. 9 criminal charges in all, based on the claim that I'd supposedly leaked classified information about Operation Merlin to James Risen. The truth is that I did not leak any classified information related to CIA operations to James Risen or to anyone else. But I am a whistleblower. I'd blown the whistle by suing the CIA for discriminating against me when I was an employee there. I'd also attempted to blow the whistle about the dangers of Operation Merlin, not by leaking, but by submitting my warnings to staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Sadly, those warnings were ignored. I'd been forced to accept some disheartening truths, that neither blatant discrimination nor a dangerous operation related to weapons of mass destruction were matters of real concern to the powers that be at the agency or among the members of Congress charged with oversight of intelligence matters. Even before the trial had begun, I'd known that my prospects weren't good. The world had witnessed the cases of Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, John Kiriakou, and a series of other whistleblowers whose prosecution, some said persecution, had been pursued by President Barack Obama with an eagerness that almost suggested a personal vendetta. In the atmosphere created by these cases, the mere accusation of having leaked classified information was enough to automatically condemn someone. In refusing to plead guilty and instead insisting on my right to go to trial, I knew I was facing an uphill battle, but I could not and would not confess to something I did not do. During the trial, the government did not present a shred of hard evidence to validate the charges against me. Even Judge Leonie Brinkman summarized the case against me as being based on, quote, very powerful circumstantial evidence, end quote, rather than on hard proof. But there was one incriminating fact about which there could be no doubt. The CIA had paraded a whole host of current and former agents in front of the jury, and I didn't look like any of them. I was a black man who dared to build a career serving my country as an officer of the CIA. The trial had lasted a week and a half. Now I was enduring the most excruciating part of the whole ordeal, waiting for a verdict. How the hell did it all come to this? I'd grown up as a true believer in the American dream. Work hard, do your duty, stand up for yourself. Those are the rules of the game, or so I'd been taught. I knew I'd done nothing wrong, and I knew that fighting against wrongs is what an American hero is supposed to do. That's all I knew how to do. That's why I was now clinging to hope and continuing to fight, unable to comprehend how defending my rights could somehow get me branded a traitor. Thankfully, I wasn't alone in that waiting room. My wife, Holly, and my attorneys, Ed McMahon and Barry J. Pollock, were there beside me. But having company isn't very comforting when you have no words to say to one another. Silence can be uncomfortable, and when it's forced, it can be absolutely nerve-wracking. All of them, especially Holly, had believed in me and fought for me, and I could tell that awaiting the jury's decision was almost as excruciating for them as it was for me. But for me, there was a sharper twist to this agonizing time of uncertainty. More than waiting to learn my fate, I was waiting to learn what my country thought of me. This was a question I'd wrestled with my entire life. The experience was often stressful, even painful. My entire life had been one of fighting against stereotypes, assumptions, and limitations placed on me because of the color of my skin, something that happened to me repeatedly in both white America and black America. The American dream I believed in and strove for wasn't a white American dream or a black American dream. It was simply my American dream. But to many of those around me, it must not have been the right American dream, because I kept getting into trouble through no intention of my own. That, in a nutshell, is the story of the events that brought me to this room. My years of struggling to find a place in American society where I could be accepted for who I am. My battle to be recognized as a worthy member of the CIA. My shadowy conflict with people within the agency who, for some reason, were unwilling to accept me as part of their team. Unwanted Spy by Jeffrey Sterling. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived.
What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize
The Supreme Court essentially took down democracy. We are no longer a democracy. We no longer get what we want, what the majority of Americans want. We no longer get from government, and that has largely been the case since the 1980s. This is the reason why when a mobbed-up real estate developer and reality TV star declared that he was running for president to drain the swamp and break Washington, a lot of people said, cool, we're sick and tired of the damn swamp, and voted for him. It's why when Barack Obama said, he was going to bring hope and change, people were like, yeah, we want some friggin' change. So anyhow, I wrote this up as an op-ed. You can read it right now over at alternet.org or rawstory.com. The headline, How the Supreme Court and the Morbidly Rich Are Ruining Democracy in America. So, hope you find it interesting. Anyhow, JP in Marietta, Georgia. Hey, JP, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
I am well. What's up?
Not too much. So on your question of the day of can Democrats win back all three branches of government and what should we do, I believe we can, but we cannot mess it up. And I think that this impeachment situation is going to kind of determine that, because if we go with a very limited scope that the Republicans are able to hammer away on, whether it's true or not, we know that they don't tell the truth very often. But if it's just one thing, they're going to be able to swing their base, I think, to believe what they say. And if we go out and if we, lay out all of Trump's crimes, kind of go as broad, maybe not as possible, but get as many things, as many articles of impeachment as possible, that will help us very, very much.
Well, the arguments, there's an argument for either one. The argument for doing one simple thing, he tried to bribe Ukraine, to get political dirt, which is an impeachable offense. Bribery is even mentioned in the impeachment statute. And then he tried to cover it up. If you go with that, the Republicans are going to try and punch as many holes in it as they can right now. I noticed, I believe it was Friday, Limbaugh devoted most of his show to saying that the entire Russia thing was a setup by the FBI. That the FBI put all these guys, in place, and all these people in the Trump administration put them in place and set them up, and so they'll come up with some elaborate BS story to knock it down, and then you've got your one charge, and it's not being believed. On the other hand, the argument against multiple, so that's the argument in favor of multiple charges against one charge. On the other hand, the argument against multiple charges is if you throw 6 or 8 different charges at him, some of them will get knocked down, some of them won't seem credible or whatever, but and some people just can't hold 6 different things in their head at one time. You need to make it very, very simple. So, I'm not taking a position on this right now. I'm going to trust Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, who I think she really knows what she's doing, and I think they're pretty solid on this. I'm going to trust them to work this stuff out, but we'll see. But you raise a really important point, JP. Thanks a lot for the call. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it is just common sense, and it has been true forever, that if you concentrate wealth, you will, then have the effect on democracy of having less democracy, because the more concentrated the wealth is, the more power is in fewer and fewer hands. And this was known way back in the 1930s, because we had a similar situation politically and economically at that time. And it's the cyclical nature of the capitalist system to eliminate more and more players in the marketplace. A truly competitive market would actually translate to a truly democratic society. But the only way that you can keep that is by actually having regulations.
Yeah.
And this was known in 1980, and many people said we're going to end up back in the 1920s and 30s with the same kind of problem.
Well, it was known long before that. I mean, Socrates, if I'm remembering my high school history, was made to drink hemlock because he supported the revolution of the 400 and the revolution of the 40, and both those revolutions were basically, wealth had gotten so concentrated in the hands of those men that they were able to overthrow the Greek democracy. I mean, and Socrates supported that because he was not a fan of democracy. He thought mob rule was a dangerous thing, and his support for that is what got him the hemlock. Am I remembering that right, John?
Well, my knowledge of history begins in the modern period, and I don't know very much about it.
But I think it goes way, way back. The idea that when you have concentrated power, concentrated wealth, it becomes concentrated power, political power. And the more concentrated that political power is, the weaker the power of democracy is. It's an absolute teeter-totter.
And eventually it's going to cannibalize and eat away at the economic system so that it will fail too.
Yes. Yeah. Or it will cease to work in a way that benefits enough of the people that the popular government begins to fail. And then people either turn to a strongman like Hitler in the 30s, or they like Mao and Xi, they just go with
or whoever. I mean, we're going to end up in a feudal type of system with none of the noblesse oblige, because I mean these capitalists. I mean, there are some very enlightened ones, and I've seen that myself. You've had one on, interviewing one, and there's a few others that are very enlightened, but mostly they really could care less. I mean, most of them are like our president.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. John, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. By the way, just a heads up, in our third hour today, I put out this call. I said, if any presidential candidates on the Democratic side, well, heck, for that matter, on the Republican side, want to come on this program and take calls from listeners for an hour, I'll provide you with a relatively neutral forum. I'm not going to pick on you if I don't agree with your policies. I'll just let you lay out your proposal. And we've had Andrew Yang has been here, and Marianne Williamson, and Bernie Sanders, and Tom Steyer. And this afternoon, John Delaney is going to be with us for the third hour of the program, taking your calls. So it should be fascinating. Get ready for that. Rick in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rick, what's up?
What's up? Well, regarding your conversation in the very beginning of the show about, the Democrats winning and, what do I think is going to happen? Well, I just think we should fight like hell to the 11th hour. Yeah. Because there's going to be a level of complacency, particularly with those individuals that are riding the fence or don't know sure if they're going to even vote. I think we need to fight like hell to the very end, particularly since my local Democratic committee, I haven't got one brochure about any Democrat in this county at all. So, and the Republicans are sending it out, and that's got to talk people to vote Republicans. Yeah. So I think the Democrats.
And I think we need to vote. I think we need to fight not just to the 11th hour. I think we're going to have to fight to the 13th hour. And what I mean by that is that you're going to see, probably for the first time in a big way, you're going to see a bunch of elections around the country where Democrats win and Republicans start yelling and screaming about voter fraud or election fraud. Or voting machines even. They're going to start talking about voting machines. And, they're going to try to make any Democratic victories seem as illegitimate as possible. I mean, you take that to the bank. And so we're going to have to be fighting even after the election. I mean, this is, I had this conversation with John Edwards after the 2004 election. And, John Edwards turned out to be not the most, to be one of the more flawed candidates, shall we say, charitably. But he was, at that time, we didn't know about his secret life. And he on this program was saying, well, actually, mostly he was saying to me off the air, but he did say it sort of on the air, that he strongly disagreed with John Kerry about the Ohio results, that they needed to fight the Ohio results, that they needed to You know, they really needed to figure out what was going on, and Kerry just kind of rolled over, unfortunately. So he wasn't willing to fight to the 13th hour. Al Gore did. I mean, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. So you know,
well,
and I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree mostly because of what happened with the closed meeting and they broke into the meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to do whatever they can do to prove they're right.
Yeah, the old skiff. Yep, I'm with you. Rick, thank you for the call. Mona, is it Mona or Mana in Lake Dallas, Texas?
Hi, Tom. It's Mona.
Hey, Mona. What's up?
I just had a real quick thought, and this has to do with always following the money, especially in this particular administration. And I was struck by the government contract that went to CertaPath, which has, of course, a tie to Trump's brother, whose name is Robert. Well, I don't think it's probably a coincidence that on that butt dial phone call that Rudy Giuliani did, he was looking for somebody named Robert, and it had to do with money because his contract was approved just a few days after that.
You think that it was Trump's brother who Rudy was saying is in, where was he saying he was? He was someplace outside the country.
I think it's,
yeah.
Wasn't it Bahrain? I think so.
Yeah, may well be somewhere in the Middle East. And he was saying, he's over there, but we need hundreds of thousands of dollars. You think that was Trump's brother he was talking about?
I don't know. I just don't.
I mean, anything's possible.
Coincidences.
I've not seen any really, good speculation that had a backup to it. But I think that's entirely possible. Fascinating. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if it was? I mean, I think.
I know, the whole family, right?
Yeah, well, the Trump crime family. Surprise, surprise. I mean, his sister stepped down from being a federal judge so that she wouldn't be investigated for tax fraud, for participating with Donald in the tax fraud of his father. Mona, thank you very much for the call. Appreciate it. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your thoughts and mine and the news of the day right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Jack in Petaluma, California. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, how are you today?
I'm well. What's up?
I'm right at the pinch point, what I call a pinch point.
Mm-hmm.
All the evacuees had to come through Petaluma.
Oh, you mean a physical? You're literally at the bottleneck point where wow, for the fire refugees. Okay.
Yeah, because north of here, 101 is 3 lanes.
Mm-hmm.
South of here in Marin County, it's 3 lanes. Through Petaluma, it's 2 lanes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
that's remarkable.
Jack,
are you concerned that Petaluma is in danger?
No, Petaluma's not in danger. As a matter of fact, we had power all through this because they had to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
The traffic signals.
Right.
So it's not so much, Tom, that PG&E, it's the fact that they developed Sonoma County with only one way in and one way out.
Yeah.
You can take Highway 1 down through Marin, but 101 is the only way. Here, Santa Rosa, Windsor, Healdsburg, you all have to get out through Petaluma.
Yeah.
You understand? And these developers are coming in and putting in housing like you wouldn't believe down here.
Yeah, I get it. Jack, thanks a lot for the call. I need to move along. Gary in Baden, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Thom Hartmann. Thank you. I appreciate it. More than you'll never know.
Thank you.
So, again, we're at the core of the problem. This is why caller just got in. So I have to call you, obviously. I have a few views, and I'd like to close with a closing thought.
Okay.
From my fellow Americans and you. Now, does America 29 get it? Do we get it when it's the core? It's entrenched greed. Come on, folks. It's really all of America. Sure, is it the liar in chief that's promoting all this and the Sure, they are. They're the major reason. But we have to take some responsibility in it too. Greed has no heart ever. It's how you treat people, how you minister government.
Well, here's the problem, Gary, and this is the point that I think that we really, really need to hammer home, is that in 1976 and 1978, the Supreme Court said to the greediest people in America, the billionaires and the corporations, you may now own the American political process by owning individual politicians. And
we have to reject that.
And we have never recovered from that. In fact, what that did was that put us on the long downhill slide toward what Franklin Roosevelt referred to as fascism, the seizure of the state by corporate interests.
Entrenched greed. That's how I refer to it. We have earned, this is FDR, we have earned, and I hope I'm not being too loud, but enough of this already. Me and you are trying to get to the root of it, and I'm going to end this. Be kind for everybody you meet or even talk to on a radio show is fighting a hard battle.
Yeah, we all are. We all are on all sides. Gary, thank you. Thank you. Be kind. What good advice. I'm looking forward to the new Mr. Rogers movie with Tom Hanks. It'll be a nice break from what we've got right now in the White House. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about election financing, and I think you briefly mentioned talking about Democrats might have to take some PAC money or super PAC money.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give a little bit of a background. 1979, I went to Austin, Texas for a food co-op conference. And the speaker there was Ralph Nader. And in 1979, Ralph Nader loomed much larger today as a public figure. He was kind of like a Bernie Sanders-like figure. He had a movement behind him with public research interest groups. And you know all this because you were in the same age bracket, but not all your listeners might know this. What he said, among many things, was the White House was completely surrounded by a knocking group of lobbyists and campaign contributions, which made it very difficult for anything to come out of the White House. And this was during the Carter years.
Right.
There were a lot of initiatives, especially for alternative energy. He said if everyone in America gave $1, we could buy Congress back. And we all laughed our heads off when we heard that, like, yeah, we should buy Congress back. He said, no, really, we should all put up $1 and buy Congress back. Well, $200 million back then, that's like, what, $2 billion today?
Yeah.
After inflation from all those years. So the thing is, it's come finally to fruition today with Bernie Sanders actually raising, $100 million or more the last time around, I think, and now he's on the same track this time. So this is the countervailing force to that corporate money that surrounded the White House. The other thing I wanted to bring up was the PAC money, the dark money, whatever you want to call it. The corporations, they've made a ramrod out of this money that they bundle together and they go after candidates. They attack them. They don't coordinate with their people, but they attack the Democrats. I think that there might be a need to accept some of this money, and here's why. Here's something that people need to understand. We live in a global capitalist system. There is no socialist wealth-producing nation-state out there. There's no socialist wealth-producing entity that we can go, please, let's finance the countervailing force to global capitalism as it's expressed in Washington, D.C. politics. There isn't any. The system that we have is the system that we have. If we are going to attack everybody and rip everybody's throat out that doesn't live up to some abstract purity test, I don't know how we're going to
have a problem.
Forward.
And I think in the general election, I mean, I get it that Bernie and Elizabeth are both saying, we're not going to take any kind of corporate money and we're not going to take any kind of PAC money. once the primary is over and the general election has begun, regardless of who the Democratic candidate is, I'm in favor of some sort of a filter process. In the past, for example, with the Obama campaign, they would take corporate money. They take money from banks, for example, but they wouldn't take money from oil companies, if my recollection is correct.
Right.
And so you just figure out, what are you going to do? I mean, you can't just unilaterally disarm. You can't run a presidential campaign on a couple $100 million. It's going to take $1 billion or more. And what did Willie Sutton say? Why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. On the one hand, on the other hand, I'm very concerned that we're surrendering our values, and I just haven't reconciled this one internally at all yet.
Well, I make one last pitch for we have to accept some money. You're right. We need to filter it out.
Yeah.
David Harvey, who you might be familiar with, he's a geographer. He's an academic. He's a left Marxist analysis of global capitalism. During the Occupy movement, he was, I think, in many places, but in Philadelphia, he came out and he said, "Look, we've got to stop attacking somebody because they have a good-paying job." He says, what nonprofit, what socialist economy is out there that will hire a brilliant young attorney, a brilliant young finance person, a brilliant young whatever, urban planner, take your pick. If you want to go out and get a job and use your PhD or your advanced degree, who's going to hire you? You have to work. No one's going to support you.
I get your point, Paul. And what this goes to is that we've got to change the rules of the game. You don't kill the game, you change the rules of the game. Back to rules that work. Paul, thank you for the call. Catherine in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Catherine, you wanted to correct me on Socrates?
Yes, I do. He was made to drink the hemlock because he went against the sophists. He taught his students the evils of sophistry.
So who was it who was in on the revolt of the 40 and the 400? I thought that I'm recalling Stone's biography of Socrates, which I realize there's some dispute around when that biography came out. This was like 15, 20 years ago. But that was his argument, as I recall.
No, that's not true. Socrates had a love for the rule of law.
Right.
The rule of law is what he taught his students, Plato and those people. And he had a love for argument, good, clean, legal arguments.
Right.
But
why did they make him drink this hemlock?
They said he was corrupting the youth.
Right. No, I remember that. That was the actual charge against him, that he was corrupting the youth. Yeah, you're absolutely right on that. I recall, but there was some nuance to that Stone was talking about. But in any case, Catherine, I'm sure you're right. And like I said, I'm running off an old memory, and you apparently are very familiar with this. Thank you very much for the call and for setting me straight. So the question, or a number of questions, will democracy recover from what the Supreme Court did? Will the Democrats win in 2020? When we have a Democratic candidate, how should we deal with big money as a party? Or how should that candidate deal with big money? I think these are all really good questions. And next, I want to get into the damage to science and to the earth that the Trump administration is doing to build on this conversation.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
book today is Cyber War, How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. This is from the introduction. Imagine a strategy memo forecasting cyber attacks by Russian hackers, trolls, and bots designed to roil social discontent and damage the electoral process of a major party U.S. presidential nominee. Or, if she winds up winning, sabotage her ability to govern. Guaranteed payoff, no fingerprints, no keystroke record, no contrails in the cloud. To ensure that Americans would believe that disparaging messages about her were made in the U.S., use Bitcoin to buy space and set up virtual private networks on American servers. Distribute hacked content stolen from the accounts of her staff and associates through an intermediary, WikiLeaks. Use identity theft, stolen social security numbers, and appropriated IDs to circumvent Facebook and PayPal's demand for actual names, birth dates, and addresses. On platforms such as Instagram and Twitter, register under assumed names. Diffuse and amplify your attack and advocacy through posts on Facebook, tweets and retweets on Twitter, videos on YouTube, reporting and commentary on RT, blogging on Tumblr, news sharing on Reddit, and viral memes and jokes on 9gag. Add to the mix a video game called Hiltendo, in which a missile-trading Clinton figure vaporizes classified emails sought by the FBI. Employ online agitators and bots to upvote posts from imposter websites such as blackmattersus.com to the top of such data analytics and search engine maximization tools built into social media platforms. To test and fuel doubts about the security of U.S. voter information, hack the electoral systems of the states. And throughout the primary and general elections season, seed the notion that if Hillary Clinton were to win, she would have done so by rigging the election, an outcome that would repay her assaults on the legitimacy of their leader's presidency with doubts about her own. Were she instead to lose, she would no longer be a thistle in the toned torso of the hackers and trolls' boss's likely boss. Every result but one produces a desirable outcome for the Kremlin. Outcome 1, Clinton is off the international stage. Outcome 2, she wins but can't govern effectively. Outcome 3, the former Secretary of State is elected and the country simply moves on, but the sabotage nonetheless has magnified cultural tensions and functions as a pilot from which to birth later success, perhaps when she runs for a second term. The only eventuality that damages the Russian cyber soldiers and their commander-in-chief is the fourth, in which, in real time, the cyber attackers are unmasked by a vigilant intelligence community, condemned by those in both major political parties and around the world, characterized by the media as spies and saboteurs. The Russian message is blocked or labeled as Russian propaganda, and when included in media accounts, the stolen content is relentlessly tied to its Russian origins and sources. None of that, however, happened. Instead, to the surprise of the Russian masterminds, as well as both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, he won the Electoral College, and with it a 4-year claim on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although countrywide she bested him by almost 2.9 million votes, he unexpectedly captured an Electoral College majority by running the table. By the end of the evening of November 8th, Florida, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were in his column. The ways in which Russian hacking and social media messaging altered the content of the electoral dialogue and thus contributed to Donald Trump's victory are the subjects of this book. To begin my exploration, this overview chapter will highlight key findings of the U.S. intelligence community, preview my focus on the hackers and trolls and the synergy between them, justify casting the Russian machinations as acts of cyber war, outline ways in which susceptibilities in our system of government and media structures magnified their effect, and note 5 presuppositions that will shape my analysis of the Russian trolls' work, and one that will guide my study of the effects of the hackers. Forming the backdrop for my inquiry are 3 reports on the Russian intervention of the 2016 presidential election. The October 7, 2016 statement jointly issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Election Security. The January 2017 conclusion of the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the February 2018 Robert Mueller indictment of 13 of the Russians allegedly behind the social media intrusions. On a day that will live in campaign lore, as much for what didn't happen as what did, more on that in a moment, the first of the 3 revealed the following. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of email from U.S. persons and institutions, including the U.S. political organizations.
The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DCLeaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motives of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to affect public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. That's from the report. The next report put a name to one of those senior-most officials and specified an intended beneficiary, Donald Trump. Cyber war is the... Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Gates and here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The war on science, the Republican war on science, and it has gone into a overdrive, into a brand new phase here with the Trump administration. It's just essentially exploded. But this has been going on for some time. I mean, this began with the Reagan administration after the Supreme Court in 76 and 78 said individuals, rich individuals and corporations can buy their own politicians. They rushed in to buy basically every Republican in sight and half the Democrats. And the Reagan administration was the first to start dissing science and rolling back research on science. We've had some forward motion during the Clinton and Obama administrations, but it has been nothing compared to the ongoing slaughter of science and science funding as a result of the Republicans. This is now really, I mean, we're down to, we've cut through the skin and through the fat and through the muscle, and now we're down to the bone here. I mean, this is just remarkable. Oliver Millman, writing in The Guardian this month, the treatment of science by the Trump administration has hit a crisis point where research findings are manipulated for political gain, special interests are given improper influence, and scientists are targeted for ideological reasons. A nonpartisan task force of former government officials has warned. This is the National Task Force on the Rule of Law and Democracy. They point out that there are almost weekly violations of previously cherished norms. Over at the EPA, for example, scientific advisory boards have been redrawn to include industry representatives. The EPA's leadership has told scientists to reverse their findings in a report that showed the economic benefits of protecting wetlands from pollution. And then they suppressed another study that found that a greater threat is posed by toxic chemicals in water than previously thought. Oh, we can't have that. That's science. You know, the George W. Bush administration, they were told, the EPA was told to downplay the link between carbon dioxide emissions and climate change. And, during the Obama presidency, the EPA was told to dial back their concern about fracking and groundwater. I mean, this has happened during and under and within every administration since 1981, since the Supreme Court legalized industry owning the political process. And now, for example, in Trump's proposed 2020 budget, he slashed funding for the National Science Foundation and the Department of Energy's Office of Science. These two groups oversee $10 government national laboratories, right? The biological ones, the nuclear ones, the agricultural ones, all of them being cut by Trump's war on science. And now, this from the New York Times, Donald G. McNeil Jr. writing in the New York Times, in a move that worries many public health experts, the federal government is quietly shutting down a surveillance program for dangerous animal viruses that someday may infect humans. Now, you may remember 10, 15 years ago, there was that SARS thing where these civets, these kind of, they look more like possums, but they're cats out of China that sometimes are used for food. Some of these civets apparently had this virus, a coronavirus, called SARS. And it jumped from the civets to a person, and from a person to a bunch of people, and boom, exploded across the world. And over a fairly brief period of time, and there were stories about people vanishing, and I mean all kinds of. But people were dying from this, and you could pick it up from just pushing a button in an elevator. Was the way that it spread in one particular place. Well, that came from the civet cats. Ebola is coming from animals. I've got a whole list of they're called zoonotic diseases, right? The diseases that start in animals. AIDS started in chimpanzees. Ebola starts in bats. SARS started in civets. The Nipah virus in South Asia starts in date palm sap infected by bats, and then gets to pigs, and then gets to humans. MERS, M-E-R-S, is carried by bats, but they infect camels, which infect humans, just by being in the vicinity of camel fluids. And then once humans get it, the virus can jump from human to human. They're having a problem with this in Saudi Arabia, especially in hospitals. So, when the SARS thing happened, and then we figured out, okay, AIDS was a zoonotic disease. We've known for a long, long time that syphilis was a zoonotic disease, that humans got that from sheep. I mean, every one of these diseases came from animals to us. The United States Agency for International Development, the USAID, now this was in 2005, and it was started by the H5N1 bird flu scare. There was a really serious case of a strain of bird flu that was in a bunch of birds in Asia that looked very, very similar to the bird flu that killed so many millions of Americans and people all around the world with the Spanish flu epidemic or pandemic of 1918, as I recall. And so they funded this program. It was launched 10 years ago. They funded this program with $207 million. And it has collected over 140,000 biological samples from animals, found 1,000 new viruses, including a new strain of Ebola. They've trained about 5,000 people in 30 African and Asian countries to look for these diseases and to bring them to people's attention. They have built 60 medical research laboratories in poor countries where so many of these, because these diseases are coming out of places where humans don't normally go. And as humans are invading these territories in dense jungle or forest, or in some cases caves with bats and things, the diseases are jumping into people. So this program, both the George W. Bush and Barack Obama were, quote, enormously supportive of this program. But, says Dr. Carroll, a fellow at the Texas A&M's Bush School of Government and Public Service, but things got complicated in the last 2 years. The president of the Eco Health Alliance, Peter Daszak, says the United States spent $5 billion fighting Ebola in West Africa. This costs far less, right? Stopping it before it becomes an epidemic. But the Trump administration is saying, we don't need this. It's science. We don't need science. Come on. We'll just tell you what's true, right? Global warming is not a problem, and it's not caused by people. Or if it is, it doesn't matter. Everything's good. Coal is clean. It just goes on and on and on. And again, you can track this back. This is a crisis in science caused by a Supreme Court decision, a pair of Supreme Court decisions in 1976 and 78, pushed by Lewis Powell, who had been put on the Supreme Court in 72 by Richard Nixon. The guy who wrote the memo in '71 saying we've got to, to his business and rich buddies saying, we have been apolitical up to this point since World War II, and we need to get political. And we need to take over the courts, and we need to take over Congress, and we need to take over our colleges and start, teaching our perspective in our colleges. And we need to build, and we need to take over the media. We need our billionaires to buy radio and television stations all over the country and create a television network, which, of course, Rupert Murdoch did. Basically, we've got to rise up and take this whole thing over. They've been in the process of doing that ever since. And one of the big victims has been science, because the science is inconvenient to many of these people. And until we deal with this, until we do something about this, until we push back on this ability that the Supreme Court gave to billionaires and to corporations that have very specific agendas that very often have to do with increasing levels of pollution because it increases profits. Until we do something about that, this war on science is going to continue to get worse and worse. And the political system is going to continue to get more and more muddy. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. So who do you think is going to win in 2020? I mean, right now, one of the stories is that the Republicans are freaking out. They think the Democrats are going to sweep the House, the Senate, and the White House. You think it's possible? If so, what should our agenda be? And how do we deal with this money in politics problem?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I have two proposals I'll share with you after the break. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hello, Tom.
Hey, Bob.
And, yeah, it's just as usual. I'm listening as I wait, and the little point I was going to make just gets it gets expansive as I listen to you. You're so full of knowledge and wisdom, frankly. Provocative thinking. Okay, Socrates. The thing there is Socrates was teaching the young people to be reasonable and logical. He was teaching people to argue, and he was teaching people to find art of communicating and persuasion. And he was a threat to the authoritarians. He wasn't necessarily teaching respect for the law if it was made by authoritarians. And what you're talking about in terms of how our system of democracy has been undermined all these years, all our lifetime, undermined by authoritarian rule. And the Supreme Court has been taken over, if not always been a source of authoritarian rule. At some points in time, we're glad it's there because it can clarify things.
But the Supreme Court is, in fact, the least democratic of the three branches of government. I mean, it's not answerable to we the people in any way at all at any time.
Right. If Congress was to work the way it was meant to, there's no need for any Supreme Court other than a bunch of old guys who might be wise for all their years of experience, who might advise people in a bind. Other than that, we've got no use for the Supreme Court in a democratic society. So we've got way off the mark with the corporatization and homogenization of society, to the point where we can't even really grow democracy from the ground up anymore. It's illegal.
Well, it's not illegal. It's just really hard to do. I mean, that's all the bad news. The good news is that 4 years ago, Bernie Sanders proved that you could have a people-powered campaign. And in this election cycle, you've got two solid candidates who are doing just exactly that. They're running people-powered campaigns, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And they're keeping up with everybody. I mean, they're raising more money than most of the other candidates.
Yeah, and the money is a real corrupting influence on the whole system, whether you like Bernie and Elizabeth or not. And I favor them. But the problem, we need more Socrates before they're all locked up.
Yeah, I think we're still debating Socrates here, or still trying to figure it out. But But yeah, I mean, this is, Bob, thanks a lot for the call. This is the bottom line. I mean, if we don't do something about the Supreme Court writing these laws, which, by the way, they're not authorized to do by the Constitution. There's nowhere in the Constitution that it says that the Supreme Court can create law or doctrine. Nowhere. So the Supreme Court comes up with this idea of corporate personhood and puts it into law through the 18th century, or the 19th century, rather. And then in the 20th century, the Supreme Court comes up with this idea that billionaires owning politicians and then corporations owning politicians, that's just free speech. And until we take a meat axe to these two things, until we can take down those decisions, we're not going to be a functioning fully. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. The supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a reminder, by the way, at the top of the next hour, the third hour of our program, I have made this program available to any Democratic candidate. I've made this program available to any Democratic candidate, running for president who wants to come on to take calls from listeners for an hour. And I've said I will not be hostile to you. It'll be a neutral venue. My callers may be or may not be. God only knows. And we've had Andrew Yang do this, and Marianne Williamson, and Tom Steyer, and Bernie Sanders. In fact, Bernie did it for 11 years. And John Delaney is going to come on at the top of the next hour and take your calls. So, get ready if you have questions for him. I think it should be interesting. It should be fascinating, in fact. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am well. What's up?
Tom, I want to talk about the Supreme Court. And then, of course, Trump just left here with a fundraiser, I think, of about $4 million.
Wow.
Yeah,
after trashing your city while he's there. Yeah.
Oh, he did. And there were protests, and it was just wild. But, Tom, I wanted to talk about the Supreme Court because I remember from the last debate, and Elizabeth Warren said, why are we afraid of big, bold ideas? And she specifically said that I think she would end the filibuster. And when a question was asked from the moderator about adding more Supreme Court justices, I just recall Biden just immediately shooting it down. Well, I don't believe in stacking the Supreme Court, and we can't do that.
Right.
However, Tom, I don't see any other way to deal with the Supreme Court other than to add justices. And I'll hang up. I don't think it's stacking, but please tell me pros and cons of that.
Sure.
Because at this point, we've got to do something. I'll hang up and listen.
Okay. Thank you, Pam. I'll go off on a riff here. Appreciate it. So here's the deal. Back in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt was elected president in the election of 32. He became president in 33. The week he became president, every bank in America closed. There was a national crisis. He started passing legislation, under the rubric of the New Deal, Social Security, unemployment insurance, child labor laws, all kinds of things. And the Supreme Court started knocking these things down time after time after time. The Supreme Court was, saying, no, that's not constitutional. You can't do that. You can't. And the American people were getting seriously angry about this, seriously PO'd, as was FDR. So what FDR, so he got reelected in 1936, and up next was Social Security, which had been passed the year before. Well, it's now 1937, so a year and a half earlier, Social Security had been passed, and the Supreme Court was talking about reviewing the constitutionality of Social Security. And FDR could see the handwriting on the wall, and like I said, the American people were seriously angry about this, about the Supreme Court knocking down all these laws. So Franklin Roosevelt said, okay, there's 9 guys on the Supreme Court right now. We're going to say that every one of them who is over 70 years old, in aggregate, they become 1 vote. There were 5 guys on the court at that time who were over 70. All 5 of them will become 1 vote. We'll call them, justices emeritus. And then I'll add 4 more people to bring the court back up to 9 votes. It doesn't violate the Constitution. It is legal. Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution says that the Congress shall regulate the Supreme Court. And that's generally understood to mean determine the number of members of the Supreme Court. And that's changed a number of times throughout history. Now, what you'll learn if you read most contemporary history is that Roosevelt backed away from that in 37 because it was so unpopular. That's not true. Roosevelt probably would have won. The American people were supportive of his effort to pack the court. But he stopped because Justice Owen and Justice Roberts, 2 of the 4 guys who were known as the 4 horsemen, the 4 most conservative members of the court. I mean, this would be as if Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito tomorrow started voting with the liberals. That's what happened in 1937. The 2 most conservative members of the court flipped and started voting with FDR. And so FDR abandoned his plan. He said, okay, we don't need to pack the court anymore. They're on my side. And that's one thing that we can do. And Elizabeth Warren has talked about doing that, and I think it's a very good idea. The other possibility is that Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution also says that Congress may define exceptions around which or to which the Supreme Court may not rule. So Congress could now this has not been tested in the courts in 240 years. But in my opinion, and I write about this in my new book, in my opinion, Congress could pass a law saying, and by the way, in the opinion of John Roberts, who came up with this for Lyndon Johnson in an effort to overturn Roe v. Wade, Congress could pass a law saying corporations are not people, money is not speech, and the Supreme Court may not review this law. And that would be, the end of the discussion. I mean, obviously somebody would sue and take it to the Supreme Court. And it would be real interesting to see if the Supreme Court ruled against themselves or ruled to give themselves more power. But it would put right into the open the fact that we are no longer a constitutional democracy, we're a constitutional monarchy, where the monarchs of the Supreme Court have final say in all things. We'll be back with your calls after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And get ready for John Delaney in the next hour. We'll be right back.
Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. This is from the prologue. France was falling. Burned-out cars, once strapped high with treasured possessions, were nosed crazily into ditches. Their beloved cargoes of dolls, clocks, and mirrors lay smashed around them and along mile upon mile of unfriendly road. Their owners, young and old, sprawled across the hot dust and were groaning or already silent. Yet the hordes just kept streaming past them, a never-ending line of hunger and exhaustion, too fearful to stop for days on end. 10 million women, children, and old men were on the move, all fleeing Hitler's ranks, pouring across the border from the east and the north. Entire cities had uprooted themselves in a futile bid to escape the Nazi blitzkrieg that threatened to engulf them. The fevered talk was of German soldiers stripped to the waist in jubilation at the ease of their conquest. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of the dead.
The babies had no milk, and the aged fell where they stood. The hordes drawing overladen old farm carts sagged and snarled in their sweat-drenched agony. The French heat wave of May 1940 was witness to this, the largest refugee exodus of all time. Day after day, a solitary moving vehicle weaved its way through the crowd with a striking young woman at the wheel. Private Virginia Hall often ran low on fuel and medicines, but still pressed on in her French Army ambulance toward the advancing enemy. She persevered even when the German Stukas came screaming down to drop 110-pound bombs onto the convoys all around her, torching the cars and cratering the roads. Even when fighter planes swept over the treetops to machine gun the ditches where women and children were trying to take cover from the carnage. Even though French soldiers were deserting their units, abandoning their weapons and running away, some in their tanks. Even when her left hip was shot with pain from continually pressing down on the clutch with her prosthetic foot. Now, at the age of 34, her mission marked the turning point after years of cruel rejection. For her own sake, as much as for the casualties she was picking up from the battlefields and ferrying to the hospital, she could not fail again. There were many reasons why she was willingly jeopardizing her life far from home in aid of a foreign country when millions of others were giving up. Perhaps foremost among them was that it had been so long since she had felt so thrillingly alive. Disgusted with the cowardice of the deserters, she could not understand why they would not continue the fight. But then she had little to lose. The French still remembered sacrificing a third of their young menfolk to the Great War, and a nation of widows and orphans were in no mood for more bloodshed. Virginia, though, intended to go on the road, wherever the battle took her. She was prepared to take whatever risks, face down any dangers. Total war against the Third Reich might perversely offer her one last hope of personal peace. Yet even this was as nothing compared with what was to come in a life that drew out into a Homeric tale of adventure, action, and seemingly unfathomable courage. Virginia Hall's service in the France of summer 1940 was merely an apprenticeship for a near-suicide mission against the tyranny of the Nazis and their puppeteers in France. She helped to pioneer a daredevil role in espionage, sabotage, and subversion behind enemy lines in an era when women barely featured in the prism of heroism, when their part in combat was confined to the supportive and the palliative, when they were just expected to look nice and act obedient and let the men do the heavy lifting, when disabled women or men were confined to staying at home and leading often narrow, unsatisfying lives. The fact that a young woman who had lost her leg in tragic circumstances broke through the tightest constrictions and overcame prejudice and even hostility to help the Allies win the Second World War is astonishing. That a female guerrilla leader of her stature remains so little known to this day is incredible. Yet that is perhaps how Virginia would have wanted it. She operated in the shadows, and that was where she was happiest, even to her closest allies in France. She seemed to have no home or family or regiment, merely a burning desire to defeat the Nazis. They knew neither her real name nor her nationality, nor how she had arrived in their midst. Constantly changing in looks and demeanor, surfacing without notice across whole swaths of France, only to disappear again as suddenly, she remained an enigma throughout the war, and in some ways after it, too. Even now, tracing her story has involved 3 solid years of detective work, taking me from the National Archives in London, the Resistance Files in Lyon, and the parachute drop zones in the Haute-Loire, to the judicial dossiers of Paris and even the white marble corridors of CIA headquarters at Langley. My search led me through 9 levels of security clearance into the heart of today's world of American espionage. I have discussed the pressures of operating in enemy territory with a former member of Britain's special services and ex-intelligence officers from both sides of the Atlantic. I've tracked down files that were missing and discovered that others remain mysteriously lost or unaccounted for. I have spent days drawing diagrams matching dozens of code names with scores of her missions, months hunting for remaining extracts of these strange disappeared papers, years digging out forgotten documents and memoirs. The book A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell.
Want Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Information. Steve Bannon writing over for the Maddow blog. That's his headline. Trump apparently has laid out a whole bunch of highly secure information that he wasn't supposed to share, and revealed some things that weren't even true. He's like, and then he goes to Chicago and he trashes Chicago, and then and now we've got state television, Fox News, Trump TV, attacking this highly decorated lieutenant colonel who is testifying before the House this morning. It's just you add it all up, and it's like, how crazy is this? It is just. Anyhow, Patrick in Seattle. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Thanks so much for taking my call. Say, you were saying that the issue is money in politics, and I recall conversations about doing a constitutional amendment. Would that be something we could do if we had all three branches
Yes.
under the belt of the
Yes.
Democrats?
And MoveToAmend.org and Citizen.org are the two most prominent organizations doing this. Move to Amend is kind of a coalition of groups. Public Citizen, Ralph Nader's old organization, is part of that coalition. And they are both, putting forward constitutional amendments that say that A, corporations aren't people, and B, money is not speech. In other words, knocking down these two doctrines that were wholly invented out of whole cloth, out of nothing, by the Supreme Court in order to facilitate the oligarchy that we're experiencing. The problem is that a constitutional amendment has to pass the House and Senate by 2/3 majorities, and it has to pass in 3/4 of the states. So it's a really high lift. I mean, the constitutional amendment that said that Congress can't raise their own salary unless it's the next segment, the next session, and you can't raise your own salary, essentially. That was first proposed in 1797. It was finally put into law 15, 20 years ago. On the other hand, the raising the voting or lowering the voting age to 17 or 18, that lowering of the voting age, that happened in a matter of 4 months. That was proposed in March, and it became law in August, as I recall, in the 70s, I think, and that was because of the Vietnam War. So, yeah, it's possible to do them really fast, but that's on the when there's a broad public consensus. I think there is a broad public consensus for this. I think people are ready for it. So, let's move ahead. Patrick, thank you for the call. Jackie in Port Townsend, Washington. Hey, Jackie, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I was just going to point out some 3 articles on the front page of the Seattle Times on October 28th in relation to money in politics. Mm-hmm. And one is, the headline is, Boeing helped craft law that undercut oversight. And they put in a few short paragraphs in 463-page legislation.
Yes.
That allowed manufacturers to challenge regulators over safety disputes.
Not just that, Boeing gets to decide how much the guys working for the FAA get paid.
Right.
I mean, it's bizarre.
Okay. Next article, despite promises, Facebook and Google are still selling political ads in state. They promised on December 28th that they would stop selling ads about state and local elections in Washington. And the third article is, valuable resources flow through states' farmlands, catching Wall Street's eye. And it's about water rights. They're an increasingly scarce and valuable commodity and promotes speculation and consolidation of public resources.
Yeah. Yeah.
Money, money.
Yeah, it's the corporate state. I mean, this is what we're seeing is the corporate state. And frankly, I mean, you know, we used to have language for this. Let me give you a quote. I quoted this yesterday. This is from Franklin Roosevelt in a speech he gave to Congress in 1938 about the problem of monopolies. And he said, "The liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to the point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling private power." And that's what we have now. And I'm very concerned that if we don't overwhelmingly win this election in 2020, and it's going to be a hell of a fight because lots of money is lined up against it. If we don't overwhelmingly win this thing, it's going to be the end of anything that even resembles democracy in the United States. Jackie, thank you for the call. Lynn in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Hey, Lynn, what's up? Thanks for listening to WBAI.
Hi.
Hey.
Well, thanks for taking my call. I really love your show.
Thank you.
So much good information.
Thank you.
So, I was really happy you were talking about the Republicans ignoring science, because the Democrats, not every single one, but massive amounts of Democrats are also ignoring science. They're ignoring the science behind vaccines. And it's just frightening the way they've gotten away with this.
Yeah, it's not.
Everyone hears
it's neither Democrats nor Republicans. When you get into the whole vaccine thing, it's really, frankly, in my opinion, it's not the science around vaccines. It's the science around mercury. But that's a whole other conversation that I just don't want to go down that road right now. I'm talking about politics and the influence of big money on politics. Not vaccines. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Either I'm hallucinating more than is seemingly this early in the week, or we are in a world where a government official who notifies the Inspector General of wrongdoing is threatened with execution by the president, while the staffer for the ranking Republican on the House Intel Committee goes around trying to push out the name of at least one of the
yes.
whistleblowers.
Now, just so people don't understand what you're talking about, this National Security Administration staffer was accused last night and this morning on Trump TV, on Fox News, of basically being a traitor, being loyal to Ukraine, which is where he was born. He came here when he was 3 years old. He has no recollection of Ukraine, but he's an expert on Ukraine. I mean, he knows the region, of being more loyal to Ukraine than the United States. I mean, that's pretty disgusting. And then Devin Nunes's guy, he's got one of his assistants has been making sure that a number of Republican members of Congress, this is during closed-door testimony, but they know the name of the whistleblower. And let's say his name is Joe Blow. I'm not going to say his name, but let's say it's Joe Blow. They have been saying just kind of randomly to various witnesses when they have their opportunity to ask questions, by the way, you ever hear of Joe Blow? And the witness goes, no, I don't know. And they're just trying to get that name into the congressional record so that when those transcripts are released, that everybody will be able to figure out who the whistleblower is, so the flying monkeys will be able to descend on him.
And meanwhile, the government refuses to reveal the name of a Belgian Malinois dog who took part in the al-Baghdadi raid, apparently because there's a hazard that some terrorist hit squad is going to look up the address of Sergeant Sniffy on the telephone directory. Yeah. I mean, this is insane.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how closely dog names are tied to individuals or to battalions or to groups or to there may be a legitimate reason for that, Mike. It does seem minor. The fact that Trump even revealed that there was a dog, though, according to numerous intelligence experts who've been on, mostly MSNBC and CNN, but are speaking up in the press, that was a big problem. Because, now they can not only track us by what we're doing, but by what our animals are doing. Are they bringing an animal with them? How they can plan ways to prevent, how do we take out animals? Let's get some, things that are really loud, high-frequency noises. I mean, Trump is equipping
the people who are opposed to us. It's just that simple. Mike, thanks for the call. Jim in Valley Center, California. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Best show on the radio. I tell everyone to listen to it.
Thank you. So who do you think is going to win in 2020, Mike? Or Jim, excuse me.
I sure hope it's a Democrat.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I really don't care who wins as long as it's a Democrat.
Yeah.
But here's why I called, and I'm completely in agreement with you. The deep state is lobbyist. The deep state is money.
Yep.
The deep state controls what's going on. What you said about the fires in California is so true. I live in a rural area now, and because of that, we've had our power off numerous times, and a wildfire came within a half a mile of us last Friday.
Oh, my.
It was scary, but everybody's okay. What I really hope that Elizabeth Warren does, or Joe Biden, whoever it is, but in Elizabeth Warren's case, when they say the medical bill is going to be $30 trillion, she says, well, yeah, but we're spending $40 trillion. We're saving $10 trillion by going for Medicare for all.
Right.
I mean, we've got to get short, concise answers. I love your thing on Cover Up Don. I mean, everybody who says that should be a short, distinct push immediately.
Yep.
And not try to be verbose or show how smart you are.
Yeah, stop saying obstruction of justice. Start saying cover up, right?
Exactly.
Stop saying quid pro quo. Start saying bribe.
Oh, I love it.
Or shakedown.
I love it, Tom. Yes, yeah, exactly. And let me give you one quick story. It'll be real quick. My neighbor across the street, never had a crossword with him. I'm a Democratic board in Valley Center. We had a party on Sunday. He put signs on his public property, because we have big areas, not to park there. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, you effing Democrats, you have too many things going on. I mean, that's what this is coming to.
Wow.
I mean, I've never even, other than hello, goodbye, that kind of stuff, never even had a word with the guy. So we've got to really buck up our things and get after it and get this money out of politics.
Yeah, it's poisoning our country. It's poisoning us socially, psychologically, and politically. Jim, thank you. Thanks for sharing that story. I'm seeing that same thing in the community where I live. I mean, it's we had a very divisive thing where somebody had put out a Trump sign and somebody else was opposed to it, and it just exploded. I mean, this should not be. We shouldn't be having battles like this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Conversations, yes. I mean, we used to have conversations about politics all the time, but you're evil, I'm good? No, come on. And welcome back. Let's see here. Dan in Baldwin, Michigan. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
Say, I'd like your idea on why the Republicans are backing Trump so hard. I believe they don't think that Igor would be electable in 2020.
Igor being Pence?
Pence.
Yeah. I think that's probably a large part of the equation. Also, Trump has a very, very strong hold on his base, and his base is very active in Republican primary politics. And so Trump has outsized power right now with his with elected Republicans. I think, frankly, that a lot of that's going to go away as the Republican primaries happen. Now, we have different primary dates in different states, and some of the primaries begin, I think, in February of next year, and some of them go as late as August. But most of them are going to be in February, March, April. And as the vulnerable Republicans, particularly in the Senate, start, seeing what the primary scenario, if they win their primaries, which as long as they don't betray Trump, they probably will. If they win their primaries, then I think that they will feel comfortable coming out and voting against Trump. The other thing is whether the Senate will have an open or a secret ballot on the impeachment, on the removal of office of Trump. And that's up to the Senate rules, and that may well be up to Mitch McConnell. And that's going to mean Mitch McConnell is going to have to decide at some point whether he wants to throw Donald Trump off the bus or not. Because if he has a secret ballot in the Senate, there's that probably doubles the chance that Trump gets removed from office. And,
That'd be good.
Yeah, I think so. I think
but
it's
who wants
for
that
the country.
hypocristian in there?
Well, Pence's embrace of right-wing fundamentalist Christianity, or his exploitation of it for political purposes. Let's be honest about what this is.
No, it's in God we trust. He believes in.
Right. Yeah. Is
on every bill
troubling.
that we have.
Yeah. It's troubling, but I think it's also something that is sufficiently out there. Pence has lied on a number of occasions, basically to protect Trump. He backs up Trump's lies. But I haven't, my sense of it is, and I could be wrong, I could be completely wrong, but my sense of it is that if he became president, that he would be a little less willing to tell 13,000 lies in 2.5 years.
Yeah, I hope that's true.
And maybe a little less willing to take us to war in order to win an election, or just to assuage his ego, to satisfy his ego.
It all depends on who's giving him the money, Tom.
Yeah, well, we saw that. I mean, back in 2000, Mike Pence wrote an op-ed talking about how tobacco doesn't cause lung cancer or isn't addictive, one or the other, maybe both. And, why is he doing that? Well, he's taking money from the tobacco industry. Surprise, surprise.
He owned tobacco shops.
Yeah, he did. Actually, Tobacco Road was the name of his little family, his family enterprise that he bankrupted before he went into politics, after being a talk show host. Mike Pence has a very strange history. But I think that Mike Pence would make a terrible president and a classic Republican president. But I think that Donald Trump is actually a danger to the world. He's a danger to world peace. That he's putting us at risk of World War III, and that concerns me tremendously. Dan, thanks for the call. We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. It's 10 minutes coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. The only two presidents who were ever impeached, thus, credibly accused of crimes that rose to the level of impeachment.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book,
and
The
then
Hidden
those
History of the
crimes
Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Welcome back. Boy, a lot on our menu here. Debbie in Sun City, Arizona. Hey, Debbie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Good. Just wanted to let you know I love your show. I've been listening to it for about the last 6 months.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And I'm just calling in response to former guest Mike, who was talking about the government not releasing the name of the canine hero.
Right. It was a caller, yes.
Yeah. I believe it was Rachel Maddow last night who had somebody on, a very experienced general, I believe it was, who stated that you don't give the name of the dog because if they have the name of the dog, then they can find the name of the handler. If they find the name of the handler, they can then find the name of the troop that he's in. If they find that out, then they have their location. So it's a matter of security. And,
Right.
I don't think him referring to him as, Sergeant Sniffy is, very respectful of the canine heroes that we have.
Yeah, I get it, and I agree with you, Debbie. I mean, I'm not going to pick on the caller, but I do think that we do need to respect these dogs. And the other thing is, if they know the name of the handler, if they really wanted to get nasty, they could go after the handler's family, who might be back here in the United States. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why these operations are so kept on the down low. Thank you very much. Thanks for tossing that in. I appreciate it. Steve in Topanga, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Well, I was just thinking, it comes down to voter turnout, and we have about half the people that are eligible to vote that actually vote in the elections.
Right.
So I think you're going to need big, bold ideas. Any kind of mush kind of stuff people are not going to get excited about. And I think you need to call. I
agree with that. Let's in the next hour, Tom Delaney or John Delaney is going to be our guest, and assuming he shows up, and it'll be interesting. I'm guessing somebody will probably call and ask him that very question, or say things to that effect.
I also like your idea about calling it short and sweet.
Yeah.
Calling it fascism and defining it.
Yeah.
And going. Like I've said before, you got to take a gun to a gunfight, not a knife.
Yeah.
And I think the Democrats are just too afraid to really get in the face of it. And I don't know. That's my opinion.
I'm completely with you, Steve. Thank you. Anthony in Philadelphia. Hey, Anthony, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How's it going today?
Good. What's on your mind?
I wanted to talk about the fact that I feel like a lot of people have the mentality that what they are voting for, instead of a candidate this time, people are looking for substance to change in the form of an actual political revolution.
Right. I agree.
I do not feel that is going to happen without some deep reflection. And I'm gonna try and make this really fast. I feel like one of our issues is the socialism versus capitalism argument that we on the left are not having clearly. We allow for the hardcore capitalists to dominate that space. And what I think needs to happen is a reflection. And we need to ask ourselves the core question, what is a society at its core? And I feel that at its core, all a society is a group of laborers creating a system in which quality of life is increased through the benefits of collective labor effort. Meaning society at its core is inherently socialist, and everything else is normal.
Well, that's the whole point of society is we look out for each other. We take care of each other. We make life better for each other, for whether it's through fire departments or police departments when they function the way they're supposed to, or public roads or hospital. Take your pick.
Yes, I completely agree. But it's about not just individual people looking out for each other. It's that's social welfare, but it's to say socialism is about any system that we create as a group of laborers who recognize we're better off through our collective labor efforts rather than our individual.
Yeah, the very real problem we have, Anthony, is that the guy who basically invented the term socialism, Karl Marx, that kind of socialism that he suggested, the ownership of the means of manufacture and supply, that did not work out all that well for the Soviet Union. And, therefore that word has a tarnish to it, and that's an ongoing problem. Anthony, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Book Club today, we're reading from Ralph Nader's new book, How the Rats Reformed the Congress, a fable. It's fiction. Chapter 1, Invader. It was one of those uncomfortable morning strategy sessions with his senior staff. For House Speaker Reginald Blamer, the discomfort was in having to figure ways to continue blocking a long overdue raise in the federal minimum wage for many millions of low-income workers when he knew in his gut it was not the right thing to do. We're in the crosshairs, he would say, starting such congressional meetings in his spacious office. Not that his anxiety would cause him to renege on the implicit promise he had made to the big boys to stop the move in Congress to raise the minimum. But there was still background anxiety. After all, politicians are only human, and like many, Speaker Blamer came from a large family that had lived through tightened circumstances. His father was a tavern keeper and his mother a seamstress. Deep anxiety, however, did have one inherent comfort at such morning gatherings. It tended to work in mysterious ways to overcome his morning constipation, the constant bane of the Speaker's existence. Holding down 30 million workers, including among them many conservative voters who, when adjusted for inflation, were making less today than workers in 1968, bothered the very private, self-censored, psychosomatic recesses of the Speaker's conscience. And so, not surprisingly, Speaker Blamer felt the onset of a solid bowel movement. He excused himself and repaired to his large private bathroom. As he sat down in the broad porcelain toilet, he felt that the expected discharge would be ample and prompt. No straining today. After quick breaks of wind, the Speaker heard a sound inside the toilet, but it wasn't from his bowels. Lifting himself up a bit, he looked down and saw the head of a mostly submerged black rat closely eyeing his bottom. "Yow, yow, yow," bellowed the Speaker as he straightened up and slammed the cover down. Alarmed, the staff rushed to the bathroom door to respectfully call, "Speaker Blamer, are you all right? Do you need help?" They dared not open the door. The Speaker did not tolerate any exposure of his privacy, especially being seen in his corpulent native suit. Another more normal person might have replied, "Yeah, I'm okay, it's just that there's a rat in the toilet bowl." But Speaker Blamer was not a normal person. He has had to be super cunning to get to his present situation in life. Being cunning means that you can instantly sense danger, being as alert as, say, a rat. And Speaker Blamer was already imagining the deriding headlines and the late-night show jokes if he disclosed what really prompted his impulsive cries of sheer terror as he leapt from the throne. So he replied, "Nothing much, boys, just one of those sudden spasms I get once in a while. Sure comes on fast, it goes away fast, too. I'll be right out." Rejoining the staff at the head of the conference table, albeit full of gas and undischarged wastes, the Speaker went through the checklist for crushing the hopes of the downtrodden multitudes. His chief of staff reviewed the usual elements of the campaign against workers. First off, the Speaker will say, "I always thought that if you raise the price of anything, you get less of it. The proposal to raise the minimum wage is a job killer." "Good soundbite," said his research assistant. The Speaker nodded gravely, but when he heard the word bite, he silently winced. The operations assistant counted off the usual reliable economics professors who could supply objective warnings about losses of jobs in recession. The Fast Food and Big Box Retailer Association had begun a large ad buy on television and radio with the announcers' stentorian voices of dire gravity. The K Street lobbyists were already in action on Capitol Hill, marshaling the corporate PACs to make sure this drive was on the front burner, hinting to legislators that their employers might see this as a litmus test for their donations. Op-eds, letters to the editors, and editorial condemnation of economically disruptive higher wages and layoffs was already in the pipeline. About to burst, the Speaker could not wait to end the meeting. "Okay, fellows, you seem to have the situation well in hand. It's not the first time we had to fight off this wage grab. Get to work." They all scattered, including an irrelevant intern who wondered to herself whether paying members of Congress would mean the government would end up with less of them. Paying members of Congress more, excuse me. The moment the door to his spacious office closed, the Speaker literally lunged to his private toilet, whereupon he unloaded a vast quantity of feces, soft and semi-hard, 3 berths worth. Before he could enjoy a moment of quiet satisfaction, a shrill shriek lifted him up as his eyes bulged. It was the black rat swimming in the bowl, propelling the terrified cry, "Yow, yow, yow." Again, he slammed down the toilet seat, kept his hand on the flush toilet handle, gritting his teeth as if to say, "On the way to oblivion, you dirty rat." His longtime secretary heard his yell and rushed to his bathroom. Mr. Speaker, what happened? Are you okay?" Recovering his composure, he replied, "I'm okay, Sarah, just more of those sudden spasms. I've got to get some physical therapy. By the way, did you schedule that fundraiser next week for an hour later?" "Yes, I did, Mr. Speaker," Sarah replied, sounding very relieved. Arriving home that early evening, he sat down to a healthy diet supper prepared by his adoring wife, Regina. Their 3 children were grown up living in distant states, so they were empty nesters. You seem unusually agitated, honey, said Regina. Did you have a hard day? It seems every day is hard in these times, he replied, shrugging off her concern. What a great meal always, Regina. Now I need some relaxing reading. Do you know where we put that colorful book of animals that we got as a wedding gift, anniversary gift years ago? Why, yes, Reginald. It came in 3 volumes, mammals, reptiles, and insects. Tell me which one you want, and I'll get it for you. Mammals, he replied. Sitting in his study, the speaker started reading about the rat. The word rat is derived from the Latin rodere, which means to gnaw. Rats produce litter several times a year with high infant mortality. If seen as weak, newborns are eaten by their parents and their stronger siblings. Over the centuries, rats have developed uncanny abilities to survive dangers everywhere, especially those produced by their close proximity to humans, whose detritus and garbage ironically provide the means by which they prosper and create new nests. Rats live everywhere, underground, in sewers, in buildings, etc. Ralph Nader. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. As we have been saying since the beginning of the Democratic campaign, any of the Democratic candidates are welcome to come on our program and do what Bernie Sanders did for 11 years every Friday on this program, which is take calls from our listeners for a whole hour. And I'll just kind of get out of the way and let them talk to our listeners. We have had, I think, 5 candidates now do this, 4 or 5 candidates do this. Today, we're very, very pleased, privileged, happy to have Congressman John Delaney with us. John Delaney is the former representative of the 6th District of Maryland in the House of Representatives, a Democrat, an attorney, a businessman. He's the author of a book, The Right Answer, How We Can Unify Our Divided Nation. His website is John Delaney, DELANEY.com, and that's also his Twitter handle, John Delaney. And Congressman Delaney, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
I'm very glad to have you with us. I believe this is the first time we've talked. Make the case for your candidacy.
Well, the case for my candidacy is really pretty straightforward. I mean, I'm running for president because I want to improve people's lives. And the way we improve people's lives is by passing laws and by having, the right policy that allows our country to prepare our citizens for all the change that's happening. And that's really what we haven't done across the last several decades. The world's changed really fast, and we didn't do the basic things we should have done to prepare our citizens and our country for the future or for the world that we're now in. And as a result, a lot of them got left behind. Mm-hmm. And so I think what America needs is not only a president who is willing to be the leader that the country needs, which is someone who's going to tell the truth, someone who's going to try to unify the nation, and someone who's going to return dignity and respect to the Oval Office. But I think the American people need someone who is focused on getting things done, because that's what we desperately need, whether it's education, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's what's going on with the hollowing out of communities around this country, whether it's addressing climate change. Whatever the case may be, the defining characteristic of all of our challenges is that we haven't done anything about them. So that's really the core of who I am as a person, and that's why I'm running for president.
tell me a little, or tell us all, and then we'll go to calls here. A little bit about who you are, where you came from, what has informed you, what life experience do you bring to this that you would want your potential voters to know about?
So I grew up in a blue-collar family. My dad was an electrician. He was a union electrician, and I grew up in North Jersey. First in my family to go to college. I went to Columbia University, then Georgetown Law School. At law school, the best thing that could have ever happened to me happened. I met my wife at law school. She was at law school with me at Georgetown. She's from Idaho. Her dad was a potato farmer. We settled in the Maryland area, and we have 4 daughters, 27 to 12. After practicing law for a year, I became an entrepreneur. I started my first business year after law school. I took it public on the New York Stock Exchange in 1996. I was the youngest CEO in the history of the New York Stock Exchange. Built up that business, sold it, started another business, took that public. My business is focused on lending money to small to mid-sized companies all over the country, the kind of companies that were ignored by Wall Street. Mm-hmm. The Obama administration gave us an award for our ethical lending practices into disadvantaged communities. And then about 10 years ago, I decided to dedicate the rest of my life to public service, which led me to run for Congress. So I think what's unique about my background is the running with both a leader in the private sector and a leader in government.
Yeah, your
and
phone.
Okay. Is that?
I'm sorry, I missed your last sentence because your phone just broke up a little bit there.
Sorry, I said I'm the only one running for president who has been both a leader in the private sector and a leader in government. And like so many Americans, I come from a kind of a classic blue-collar background, so I understand what it's like to get a helping hand and to pursue my dreams.
Okay. All right. Well, ready to pick up some phone calls?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. Antoine in Chicago, you are on the air with Congressman Delaney.
Congressman Delaney, how you doing today?
I'm good, Antoine. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I have two concerns. Number one, in the debates, I really don't see Democrats really addressing the corrosion of public education in public schools, especially concerning minorities. A lot of schools in the black communities are being closed. And another thing is a lot of the teachers that we have in these communities, the high percentage of the races. There's not a high percentage of Afro-Americans teaching Afro-Americans. And that's a concern for me. And the other concern I have is for the courts. What would you do to rectify some of these problems in reference to the appellate court judges that are being assigned by Trump? Because it always seems to me that the Democrats are playing checkers and they're playing chess when it comes to the courts.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the courts first, and I'll get to public education. I mean, look, as president, I will appoint members to the courts who are qualified, who are willing to abide by the law and interpret the Constitution, but are also willing to protect the progress we've made as a nation on some very important issues, whether it be women's reproductive freedom, marriage equality, and I want judges who put people ahead of corporations, not the other way around. So you're right. I think we've got to be very aggressive in terms of getting courts that actually don't think corporations are people too, and are willing to put people first. And that to me is the main kind of criteria of a judge. Obviously, they have to be qualified. Obviously, they have to be the kind of people who will interpret the law appropriately. But you want to protect progress that's been made.
Your phone is breaking up again.
I'm sorry.
Try that sentence again.
You want to stand up. You want judges who are willing to stand up for people, not corporations.
There you go. Okay, Elizabeth.
Am I better? Yeah. Sorry. And then on the first question, Antoine, we have chronically underfunded public education in minority communities in this country. And the reason for that is how we fund public education, right? We tie it to property taxes, which is inherently racially biased in many ways, because low-income communities fundamentally have fewer revenues flowing into their public school systems. And of African-American kids live in lower property value communities, and it creates a terrible cycle of perpetuating poverty. And so we really have to fundamentally change how we fund public education in this country to make it more just.
Yeah, I'm with you. Elizabeth in Green Valley, Arizona, near Tucson. You're on the air with Congressman Delaney. Elizabeth?
When I listen to, yes. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, thank you. When I listen to the debates, I am favoring Medicare for all, and it's from my own personal experience. In 2011, I retired due to medical necessity, and I had to have a cornea transplant, and there was complications. And between 2011 and 2017, when I qualified for Medicare, the health insurance industry was able to dip into my savings and remove $75,000 for monthly premiums, hospital costs, paying the eye surgeon, paying the anesthesiologist. My monthly meds went up. And so when I hear people say, oh, let people choose, this current system is unsustainable. It's going to come a point where people can't pay thousands of dollars every month to a healthcare industry that's making billions of profits.
So, Elizabeth, let's let Congressman Delaney respond to your question, okay?
Thank you.
So, Elizabeth, healthcare is the number one issue I hear about all over this country. And we clearly have a broken healthcare system. And in my judgment, healthcare is a basic human right. And I also think having a universal healthcare system is smart economic policy because it will put us in a position to be able to control healthcare costs over time. And it'll create a lot more economic mobility for people. So I am one of the candidates that is fully in favor of a universal healthcare system where everyone gets healthcare as a basic human right for free in this country. Where I differ from some of the candidates is I'm not in favor of what's called a single-payer universal healthcare system, meaning the government is the only payer. That's actually a very rare model around the world. Not many countries have that. Many countries have a universal healthcare system, meaning every citizen gets basic healthcare coverage as a right of citizenship for free, which is what I'm for. But most of them allow people to have choices. So if they want to opt out of the government system, they can, or if they want to get additional supplemental plans, they can. So I'm different than a lot of the folks who are running who are just for this public option thing, because that's just a government-run insurance company. That's all that is. And that doesn't solve the problem we have in this country. So I'm much closer in many ways to where Senator Sanders and Senator Warren are. In other words, I want universal health care, and I have a plan to do it called Better Care. But I just allow people to have choices, which is where I differ with them.
Okay. Congressman John Delaney is with us, taking your calls for the hour. His new book is, by the way, is The Right Answer, How We Can Unify Our Divided Nation. He's an attorney and businessman, former congressman from the 6th District of Maryland, running for president of the United States on the Democratic side. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And his website is John Delaney, as you may have guessed, .com, and his Twitter handle is John Delaney. We'll be right back. Congressman, you're still with us?
I am.
Great. We have just a 4-minute pause here where we're still on the air with our free speech TV viewers and our nonprofit affiliates. Our for-profit affiliates are in a commercial break, so anything that we say of consequence we'll recap when we come back in 4 minutes. But we'll continue taking phone calls from people who are listening to us live right now. Joseph in New York City, listening on WBAI. You're on the air with John Delaney.
Yes, good afternoon, fellas. I just have a question about why isn't Operation Crosscheck, the voter suppression tactic, discussed more and thrown in the air more by the Democrats, including yourself? Because I've seen a statistician say that it might have cost the 2016 election. And I just would like to see something focused because I think it's a very valuable piece of information for the voter, especially those being disenfranchised in a lot of states. I guess that's it.
Joseph,
Good luck, Congressman.
Yeah, Joseph, listen, I'm glad you're bringing it up because unless we're talking about voter suppression, because we know what's going on around this country, we're not really standing up for people's ability to have, in many ways, the most sacred right we have in this country, which is self-determination and participate in the democracy. So I'm with you 100%. And I'm always willing to point out the differences I have with my opponents, but I'm also the person who's going to point out where we are the same. And I think this is the issue where all the Democrats who are running for president are really in a very good spot. Maybe we should talk about it more, but as a matter of policy, I think all of us want to pass the Voting Rights Amendment Act, which is the most important thing we can really do to make sure that voter suppression does not go on in our country. I'm also in favor of, efforts to make it much easier to vote. Like, I think we should vote by mail. I think we should have many more early voting locations in this country. I think we should have automatic enrollment things when people turn 18, they basically get, or when they get their driver's license, they basically get, become immediately eligible to vote. So, if you look at states that have votes by mail, for example, their turnout is much higher. There's no evidence of fraud, which is a big myth that the Republicans like to spin on this issue. And you're right. I think we're all in a good position.
Yeah. Congressman, your phone just kind of vanished there for a second. Are you still there?
You can't hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Now you're back.
Okay. I apologize.
When we hit the bottom of the hour, where we take an actual 6-minute break, we'll reconnect with you and try to get a little more stable phone line. But anyhow, we've got 30 seconds here before the break. The motor voter law from way back in the day, the opening sentence or the opening paragraph of it explicitly says voting is the right of all citizens in the United States. It's never been adjudicated. What do you think about trying to take that before the Supreme Court?
I'd be all for that. Listen, what I want everyone to be able to be automatically eligible to vote when they turn 18, and I'd like to have vote by mail. I think again, and there's no evidence of any.
Yeah. I'm with you. Hang on. Congressman, we're going to rejoin our commercial stations here. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes and change past the hour. Congressman John Delaney is on the line taking your calls for the hour. We'll continue this in just a moment. Stick around. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Well, welcome back. Whoa, Congressman Delaney seems to have vanished. Louise, you're going to call him right back? He's no longer on the line. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is take Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Jared, you're on the air while we're trying to track down Congressman Delaney and find out what happened to him. What's up?
Oh, darn, I scared him away.
Well, were you calling specifically to ask him a question? Or because, you're a regular caller,
yeah,
I figured you would have something to
was, but I actually was, but I think his phone just broke up or something.
Yeah, his phone was falling apart, and I see Luis just tried to call him and didn't get through. So I don't know what's going on.
How about I ask you the question I wanted to ask John Delaney, and you just give it to him later on?
Okay, sure.
Okay, my question is, what would a foreign policy of President Delaney be if he was elected? Because Donald Trump, who said that he was going to be, he's going to end all these stupid wars, has just now sent thousands more troops to Syria with tanks and equipment to steal the rightful Syrian people's oil and hand it over to basically the SDF to, not that they're not Syrians themselves, but this is very problematic to what's going on here with what we're doing with the Assad government and just all these stupid wars that we're not getting out of in any way.
All right. In this oil-rich region. Yeah. Yeah, I've got it. So actually, I think I'll make a note of that, assuming that he's still available, that he's going to come back on. Wars and foreign policy is basically your question. Okay. And hang on just a second. That may be him. We'll see. And, we'll see what happens. Yeah. Oh, Congressman Delaney is back with us. Okay, hang on just a second, Jared. I'm going to let you ask him. And, whoops. Hang on. No, I'm going to have to put you on hold, Jared, before I can do that. I'm trying to, okay. Hybrid B, close. Damn. Oh, there we go. There it is. I'm sorry. Congressman Delaney, welcome back.
Yes. Thanks for having me back.
It took me a minute. Jared was just asking a question. He said, we have a minute to the break here. And he said that, what would be your foreign policy? He's sick and tired of foreign wars, particularly in oil-rich areas.
Oh, I believe in the post-World War II.
Your phone just vanished again. We're gonna have to to work this out. Congressman Delaney's on hybrid 2, Sean, but I'm not hearing him. We've got both the hybrids up. Yeah. Congressman? No, his phone is not there. So anyhow, we'll be hitting a break here in about 15 seconds, and we're going to try to reconnect this entire thing with Congressman Delaney and make it work. I don't know what's going on with the phones here, but maybe we can get him on a different phone line or something. It is 26 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll hopefully be back with Congressman Delaney right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-8.
Our book today is Cyber War, How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. This is from the introduction. Imagine a strategy memo forecasting cyber attacks by Russian hackers, trolls, and bots designed to roil social discontent and damage the electoral process of a major party U.S. presidential nominee. Or, if she winds up winning, sabotage her ability to govern. Guaranteed payoff, no fingerprints, no keystroke record, no contrails in the cloud. To ensure that Americans would believe that disparaging messages about her were made in the U.S., use Bitcoin to buy space and set up virtual private networks on American servers. Distribute hacked content stolen from the accounts of her staff and associates through an intermediary, WikiLeaks. Use identity theft, stolen social security numbers, and appropriated IDs to circumvent Facebook and PayPal's demand for actual names, birth dates, and addresses. On platforms such as Instagram and Twitter,
register under assumed names. Diffuse and amplify your attack and advocacy through posts on Facebook, tweets and retweets on Twitter, videos on YouTube, reporting and commentary on RT, blogging on Tumblr, news sharing on Reddit, and viral memes and jokes on 9gag. Add to the mix a video game called Hilltendo, in which a missile-trading Clinton figure vaporizes classified emails sought by the FBI. Employ online agitators and bots to upvote posts from imposter websites such as blackmattersus.com to the top of such subreddits as r/thedonald and r/Hillary for prison. Drive content to trend. To maximize the impact of your handiwork, use data analytics and search engine maximization tools built into social media platforms. To test and fuel doubts about the security of U.S. voter information, hack the electoral systems of the states. And throughout the primary and general elections season, seed the notion that if Hillary Clinton were to win, she would have done so by rigging the election, an outcome that would repay her assaults on the legitimacy of their leader's presidency with doubts about her own. Were she instead to lose, she would no longer be a thistle in the toned torso of the hackers and trolls' boss's likely boss. Every result but one produces a desirable outcome for the Kremlin. Outcome 1, Clinton is off the international stage. Outcome 2, she wins but can't govern effectively. Outcome 3, the former Secretary of State is elected and the country simply moves on, but the sabotage nonetheless has magnified cultural tensions and functions as a pilot from which to birth later success, perhaps when she runs for a second term. The only eventuality that damages the Russian cyber soldiers and their commander-in-chief is the fourth, in which, in real time, the cyber attackers are unmasked by a vigilant intelligence community, condemned by those in both major political parties and around the world, characterized by the media as spies and saboteurs. The Russian message is blocked or labeled as Russian propaganda, and when included in media accounts, the stolen content is relentlessly tied to its Russian origins and sources. None of that, however, happened. Instead, to the surprise of the Russian masterminds, as well as both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, he won the Electoral College, and with it a 4-year claim on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although countrywide she bested him by almost 2.9 million votes, he unexpectedly captured an Electoral College majority by running the table. By the end of the evening of November 8th, Florida, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were in his column. The ways in which Russian hacking and social media messaging altered the content of the electoral dialogue and thus contributed to Donald Trump's victory are the subjects of this book. To begin my exploration, this overview chapter will highlight key findings of the U.S. intelligence community, preview my focus on the hackers and trolls and the synergy between them, justify casting the Russian machinations as acts of cyber war, outline ways in which susceptibilities in our system of government and media structures magnified their effect, and note 5 presuppositions that will shape my analysis of the Russian trolls' work, and one that will guide my study of the effects of the hackers. Forming the backdrop for my inquiry are 3 reports on the Russian intervention in the 2016 presidential election. The October 7, 2016 statement jointly issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Election Security. The January 2017 conclusion of the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the February 2018 Robert Mueller indictment of 13 of the Russians allegedly behind the social media intrusions. On a day that will live in campaign lore, as much for what didn't happen as what did, more on that in a moment, the first of the 3 revealed the following. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of email from U.S. persons and institutions, including the U.S. political organizations. The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DCLeaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motives of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to affect public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. That's from the report. The next report put a name to one of those senior-most officials and specified an intended beneficiary, Donald Trump. Cyber war is the Thom Hartmann cruise will be sailing in July of 2020. The 7-day Oceania cruise will be going to Bermuda, and I'll be hosting onboard events about the topics of the day. More info at thomhartmann.com or 800-856-1155. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Congressman John Delaney, running for the presidency on the Democratic ticket, is on the line with us for the hour taking your calls. And Congressman, you still with us?
I'm with you, Tom.
Okay, great. Congressman is driving across the country out there campaigning, so we may have to reconnect our phones. I don't know. But you know, we'll get through this. Tom in Minneapolis. Tom in Minneapolis, listening on 950 AM. You are on the air with John Delaney.
Okay, you can hear me?
I hear you just fine.
Yeah. So, Mr. Congressman Delaney, I have a two-part question, and it's more philosophical to get a sense of your grounding. In your debate appearances, often when you're answering either the progressive candidates of Warren and Sanders, you seem to be confusing the egalitarian principles of democracy with socialism. So my question is, do you think our political democracy should be subservient to our economic capitalism? And related to that, do you think American freedoms emanate from our democracy, or do they come from our capitalism and our markets? And I'd like for you to answer both separately.
Well, I think our freedom comes from our democracy, and I think the most important thing for a democracy to do is to represent the common good of the citizens. So I think as it relates to the goal of a democracy, I don't think capitalism is the goal of a democracy. I think the goal of a democracy is to ensure that we have self-governance by our citizens and that their elected public officials are advancing the common good of the citizens.
I had a debate with Stephen Moore on this program back 5-6 years ago, and I said, you know, which is more important to you, democracy or capitalism? He was like, capitalism by a long shot, because without it, you wouldn't have democracy. And I'm like, no, I think it's the other way around. But anyway,
I mean, to some extent, the socialism-capitalism debate is a bit of a false choice, because the United States of America, in my judgment, is neither of those things. What we are is a free market economy that has strong social programs. And what's happened in the last several decades is we have not invested in and updated those strong social programs. And that's really been the failing of our nation.
Greg in Sarasota, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Delaney.
Hello. I'm 55.
Hello, Greg.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, just fine.
I can hear you great.
Okay, I'm 55. I was born and raised in Florida. And what I've seen in my years down here is everybody flocking, lately especially, flocking from all these states because, and I don't mean to be hurtful, but because of the democratic way it's been run in the government in these states, they can no longer afford to live there. And if you become president, how can you change these things? That's number one. Number two, shouldn't we address getting our government smaller? And number three, how is it possible to have someone like Pelosi in charge of anything when we're talking about our health care, which has been awful. And if you remember correctly, don't worry about it. Just vote it in. We'll worry about it later. How can we even think that any of this is going to work? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah. Well, I'll go in reverse order. I mean, I think Speaker Pelosi has done a great job. So we probably disagree on that, Greg. I think she's been, really a singular leader of the House of Representatives since she's taken it back over. So I'm a big fan of the speakers. I also think that the goal shouldn't be a big government or a small government. The goal should be a smart government that's serving the needs of the people. And, I think people go to Florida for lots of reasons. Your weather is really good, so I know that's a reason. My state of Maryland has really good kind of social programs and social infrastructures. And, we have state income taxes that pay for those things. And most Marylanders are actually pretty pleased with the services they get from our state.
Ruth in Anaheim, California. You're on the air with Congressman Delaney.
Hello. How are you?
Hi, Ruth.
Hi. I kind of have a broad question, and I'm just curious about this because it seems like we go down rabbit holes, and right now with this whole Syria thing, Trump pulled out of Syria after a phone call to Turkey, and he did it. He pulled out for self-serving reasons. That's kind of been connected, but it hasn't been focused on at all. And to me, that's really what it should be focused on. We keep going down these rabbit holes that Trump wants us to go down. And instead of looking at, why would he pull out of that particular area of Syria at that particular time? Everybody's saying, oh, he's anti-war. He's going to get credit for this. And it's just, it's not right. And just why is this not a focus about his motivation?
Thank you, Ruth.
Well, listen, I think what he's done in his policy on Syria as it relates to pulling our troops out of northern Syria, I think that was a bad decision he made. And I think it betrayed our allies, the Kurds who fought heroically with us. And I think it was a withdrawal of American leadership from an area that we should have a say in ensuring that it doesn't become a haven for terrorists again, which is the reason we're over there in the first place. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of what I think was his main offense, right? I disagree with his Syria policy, but that's why elections matter, right? The person who is in this seat makes some of these decisions. What I think we really shouldn't lose focus of is what happened with the call that he had, which I think he's trying to distract from, where he clearly encouraged a foreign government to interfere in our elections, which I think is an impeachable offense.
Stephanie in John Delaney's home state of Maryland, in Rockville, Maryland. You're on the air with Congressman Delaney.
Thank you, Tom. Congressman Delaney, I first want to commend you on your discerning choice to come on the Thom Hartmann Show, especially if you want to talk to progressives, so that's awesome. So I'm for Medicare for all, and the reason that I cannot be swayed or have not yet been swayed by the arguments that you make and that Pete Buttigieg makes with respect to, kind of a Medicare for all who want it, public and private options, is that no one has yet addressed my concerns about cost containment in that type of environment. There's a reason why these private companies, watch their medical loss ratios and try to maximize profit, as Tom was giving the example of PG&E and how they try to, keep their costs down, resulting in deaths. It's their job to make as much money as they can because they're traded on the market. And my concern is that in a public-private, options scenario, the for-profit companies will still find ways to be able to choose who they can cover, choose what they cover, leaving the public program with the most expensive procedures and the sickest people. So let's say, you have stage 4 cancer. Maybe they'll, let you have unlimited acupuncture and Reiki on the private plan, but they're not going to pay for your super multi-thousands a month chemo. And I do want to point out, which is not often pointed out, that Bernie and Elizabeth are not saying they would outlaw private insurance. They're just saying that private insurance under their Medicare Medicare for All approach would not be allowed to cover the same things that Medicare covers, because that's the only way to keep the costs down. Otherwise, the public program ends up having their costs driven up by covering things the private insurance companies are not willing to cover because of their profit concerns. So can you address that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to distinguish my health care plan from Pete Buttigieg's, because I don't think his plan is progressive. His plan, which is called Medicare for All Who Want It, is basically a public option. And the public option is basically the government setting up an insurance company. It does not create universal health care, which I am for. So I wanted to start by saying, my plan is much more progressive than Buttigieg's or Klobuchar's or Biden's. These people are all behind this public option, which I have nothing against. It should have been part of the Affordable Care Act, but it doesn't go far enough in addressing the issue we have in health care. To address the issue we have in health care, we need a universal health care system, which I've proposed under my Better Care plan, which gives every single American a basic government health care package for free. And the benefits in that package are identical to the minimum benefits in the Affordable Care Act. So cancer and all the things we just talked about would be covered. But in many ways, I model my program more off of Medicare than the Medicare for All folks. Because if you think about Medicare as a health care program, this is how it works. Every eligible Medicare beneficiary gets a Medicare plan for free from the government. Then they have options. They have options to buy supplemental plans, which many Medicare beneficiaries do, or they have an option to opt out of their basic Medicare and choose their own private insurance plan under what's called Medicare Advantage. So what Medicare is a universal health care plan with choice. And that's what I'm proposing for every American. Universal health care with choice. So just to be clear, Stephanie, my plan is much more progressive than what Buttigieg, Klobuchar, and Biden are peddling, which is a very small incremental improvement to the healthcare system and doesn't really get at the structural problems in our healthcare system. My plan is much more similar with the goal of Senator Sanders and Warren, but I just think it's a more pragmatic approach. It's very similar to what Germany has with their universal healthcare plan. So I hope that clarifies it.
Congressman John Delaney, candidate for the presidency of the United States on the Democratic side, is taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back in just a few minutes with more of your calls for Congressman Delaney. His new book is The Right Answer, How We Can Unify Our Divided Nation. His website, johndelaney.com. And, of course, his Twitter handle, John Delaney, DELANEY.com.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
He's a former congressman from Maryland, a businessman, an attorney, and running for president on the Democratic ticket. We'll be right back. John Delaney with us. And welcome back. Ed, watching us on Free Speech TV in Belfair, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Delaney.
Good morning, Tom. Congressman Delaney, my question is a yes or no question. It's easy. It has to do with the fraud and waste in our government, and I was wondering if you are willing to push, if you are the nominee or the president, to have the Pentagon audited. Thank you.
Well, the answer is the Pentagon is audited by congressional oversight. So, I believe that already is happening.
Okay. Karen in Madera, California, you are watching us on Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Delaney.
Thank you, Congressman Delaney, for running. And I just wanted to go back to the education and caution you a little bit about what you said. I don't know where you're getting your statistics from. I was a teacher in a predominantly African-American district, and I made a whole lot more money because that district was funded by business. When I later had to move to a northern district, which was more white, I was actually, taking major pay cuts. And, like I said, I don't think that what you're saying applies across the board. This wasn't here in California. This was in Texas.
Yeah, You know, the thing about it, it's a very big country, and there's always data points that don't back up, the larger trends in the nation. But what I was getting at was what I believe is a fundamental injustice with our public education system, which is it's funded predominantly by property taxes. So if you live in a high net worth neighborhood where property values are high, then a 1 or 2% property tax produces a lot more money for the local schools than if you're in a poor neighborhood where property values are low and a 1 or 2% property tax produces less money. And that creates inequitable public education, in my opinion. And I'd like to see that smoothed out. There are efforts to smooth it out, but I think they're still insufficient. So I think there's a core injustice with how we fund public education, because many kids who grow up in poor neighborhoods just don't have the same resources in their public education system that kids who grow up in wealthier neighborhoods.
Yeah, we have just 50 seconds till we rejoin to the end of this break. I agree with you, and frankly, I think the whole property tax funding for schools has been a feature, not a bug. It was designed from the get-go to keep wealthy communities wealthy and to keep poor communities poor. So are you suggesting that the federal government, like through the Department of Education, should come in and smooth that out, or that the states should be mandated to do it in some way?
Yeah, I think, the federal government, the Department of Education uses carrots and sticks. So I would like a combination of carrots and sticks to work with states and local governments to just keep smoothing it out.
So out of the general revenues?
Yeah, the general revenues, I think, can plus up some of these poorer districts. I think, you can plus it up with also matching programs to encourage the states to do more of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of ways of getting there, but I just think we got to get there.
Yeah, I completely agree. We'll be back in just a moment with Congressman John Delaney taking your calls for the hour. He's running for president of the United States. His website, johndelaney.com. You can tweet him at John Delaney. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Congressman John Delaney on the line with us, taking your calls about his run for the presidency. Kimon, listening on Sirius XM in Dayton, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Delaney.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. This is a very specific question, and I keep asking it, and I don't get a specific answer. I'd like to know why the Republicans were not prosecuted for their interstate cross-check efforts under the RICO statute. It was clearly illegal for them to take something of value from black people, Hispanics, and Asians, which was done and was done openly. Why were they not prosecuted for that?
Come on. Thank you.
Well, I didn't quite hear what of value he was referring to.
Your vote. Your vote.
Your vote. Okay,
Yeah.
I missed that part.
Yeah, the Interstate Crosscheck was that program, that Chris Kobach put together, where they compared voter rolls from states and people with common names, which are Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians in particular, got
Yep.
Yeah,
he faded out for a second there.
Yeah.
So look this is why we have to pass the Voting Rights Amendment Act, right? Because we have to have more federal government enforcement mechanisms through the Department of Justice, which includes criminal prosecution for people who engage in voter suppression actions, which I'm fully supportive of.
Okay. Gregory in Islington, South Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Delaney.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Congressman, just two questions, mostly piggybacking on one of the earlier callers. One, with regards to the judges that he asked about, your answers seem to be looking forward as far as what you will do, but we have a pressing issue with the Trump elected or seated judges. What are we going to do about that mess? I mean, these folks, from what I understand, are mostly unqualified.
Yeah.
Two,
Gregory, I'm going to have to stop it at that because we only have a minute left here. So let's let Congressman
Yeah,
Delaney.
so I'm in favor of, I think we need more, as part of Supreme Court reform, I'm in favor of term limits.
For the court. So, so now the Constitution guarantees federal judges a lifetime appointment. Would you kick them back down to the circuits? Is that how you do it?
Yeah, or we could, obviously I'd like to amend the Constitution on a few of these things. Yeah, I think that's how you'd have to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Because the court was never just, no one ever thought about people entering the court in their 40s and serving for 50 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. By the way, I miscalculated my time, and we have another minute. My apologies to the last caller, but Herb is it Dana, Florida, or Daytona, Florida?
Dana.
Okay, you're on with Congressman Delaney, and you have the last minute here, so make it quick.
Okay, how do we get? Well, one of my favorite sayings is, "We have the best government money can buy." How do we get money out of the elections?
Great question.
Great. These are the things we got to do. It would be great to overturn Citizens United. It would be great to pass a constitutional amendment changing Citizens United. But at a minimum, we have to pass a law limiting how much money can be put in a super PAC and requiring full disclosure of all the donors. Right? So I would want to get rid of super PACs if I could, but at a minimum, I want disclosures and I want caps. I want more public financing of elections. I want more kind of matching programs for small dollar donors. I want limitations on how people can kind of be involved in the revolving door of government, which I think is insidious. So those are some of the things, and then gerrymandering and voter suppression and all these things kind of work together to bend the will of the government away from the common good of the citizens.
Yeah, well said. Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thanks, Tom.
Great talking with you. Congressman John Delaney, who is, as I said, running for Congress, or running for the White House on the Democratic side. JohnDelaney.com is his website, and you can tweet him at John Delaney. And thanks so much for being with us today. It's been a fascinating day. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So, you can't just complain, right? Get out there, make sure you're registered to vote, get your friends inspired, and get active. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.